Destiny has been through some great times and not so great times over the past decade or so, but throughout it all, we definitely have some amazing memories to look back on as players. So let's celebrate this nostalgia with a recap of Destiny's history, metas, and most iconic weapons since the very beginning. Destiny has had no shortage of crazy overpowered weapons over the last 8 years or so. Some of them have even become sentient and figured out new ways to break the game. So I wanted to take a trip down memory lane and rank the 25 most overpowered weapons in Destiny's history. We have a great mix of PvE and PvP juggernauts to explore. At number 25, we have a shotgun that rocked the Destiny world with a unique perk that allowed it to rip through any tanky enemy that it faced. The Ikelos shotgun was introduced in Season 3 during the Warmind expansion. The shotgun looked awesome, but more importantly it featured a brand new perk in Destiny 2 called Trench Barrel. By meleeing the target, your shotgun could output vastly more damage than normal, and the original unnerfed version of this perk had no limit to how many shots you could fire before the perk ran out like we have in modern Destiny. The Ikelos shotgun was extremely powerful all by itself, but it could also be paired with a debuff from the tractor cannon to deal 50% more damage. You have to remember this was back in the days where all shotguns required heavy ammo to fire, and this combination became one of the best DPS options in all of Destiny 2. At number 24, we have a weapon that still plagues the Crucible today. Lorentz Driver was introduced during Season 15 and instantly became a major problem in PvP. The original version had a built-in wall hack ability anytime the enemy became selected as your target to be assassinated. Once you collected 3 of these bounties, you could go on an absolute rampage, body shot killing every enemy in sight. And precision kills would create a gravitational force pulling nearby enemies into a blast that would often result in collateral kills. I've seen way too many clips of team wipes using this linear fusion. Although it's been nerfed in several ways since its inception into the game, it still remains a pain point for many players thanks to its generous aim assist and ability to ignore incoming flinch. I'll also make an honorary mention of its cousin Arbalest, which has been a major pain point for many players in the Crucible as well, and also has been a powerhouse in PvE. At number 23, we have a shotgun pulse rifle hybrid that's risen up as a major problem in the Crucible several times in Destiny's history. Lord of Wolves has changed a number of times over the years, and every time players start sleeping on the shotgun, it somehow pops back up into the meta. Its most problematic era was when it was changed so that you could activate its alternate fire mode, Release the Wolves, for free on spawn. This doubled the magazine capacity and annihilated enemies with 10 rounds of firepower. You could kill targets from insane ranges and absolutely delete roaming supers. Players who endured the wreckage caused by this fiery shotgun earned a special emblem to commemorate this time in the Crucible. It also had a period of time during the Omni Oculus Hunter meta where it became a big issue once again. I guess we're just waiting for the next time that this shotgun becomes the biggest problem in the Crucible. At number 22, we have perhaps the most powerful sword in all of Destiny 1. All of the exotic swords blew players away when they were first added to the game, but the Dark Drinker quickly became a favorite for those interested in maximizing their DPS. After a lengthy and grindy quest to get this beast, players could use the spin to win ability to deal some insane damage against bosses and tanky enemies. It quickly became a favorite option to solo bosses like Axis. Although it hasn't directly been added back to Destiny 2, it was basically reincarnated as the Falling Guillotine, which has a very similar heavy attack. This new version of Dark Drinker was instantly a top option for DPS in Destiny 2, and it had to be reworked to stop trivializing any content that it came across. At number 21, we have a pulse rifle that instantly took over the PvP meta back in the Rise of Iron expansion during Destiny 1. Clever Dragon was an Iron Banner reward that flinched Guardians to the moon and back. It featured the highest rate of fire archetype for pulse rifles and came packed with some amazing perk options and base stats. Several high rate of fire pulses had come before this one, like the Grasp of Malak, but something about the Clever Dragon just felt special. Many players remember this as the best pulse rifle in Destiny history, and I think the Clever Dragon makes a pretty strong claim to that title. At number 20, we have a weapon with a mind of its own. Telesto became best known for breaking the game every few months. There have been over 40 Telesto bugs in Destiny's lifetime. It's become so notorious that there's even a fan site that logs every single bug instance called Telesto Report. Some of the funniest ones were when Bungie disabled Telesto, but that wasn't enough to keep it from re-equipping itself, when Telesto did double damage anytime you used the Energy Accelerant mod, which was only supposed to increase the damage of Dragonfly, Chain Reaction, and Firefly explosions, or when shooting Telesto bolts with the Ashes to Assets mod would give you 100% super energy instantly. At number 19, we have an auto rifle that rocked the Crucible in early Destiny 1. Auto rifles haven't been the focus of the meta very often in Destiny's history. There was a somewhat recent period in Destiny 2 with 600 RPM auto rifles like the Gnawing Hunger, an Uriel's Gift meta in early Destiny 2, and a Doctrine of Passing meta later into Destiny 1. But back in vanilla Destiny 1, auto rifles were incredible in PvP, and at the top of the list was the exotic auto rifle Suros Regime. With its focused fire mode, it packed a huge punch for every headshot. It felt smooth to fire, it had quite sticky aim assist, and it quickly became one of the most popular weapons for PvP for those who had access to it, at least until it got nerfed. Number 18 is a rocket launcher that was even more powerful than the Gjallarhorn in Destiny 1 PvP. The Truth had extremely effective tracking, proximity detonations, and a magazine size of 3. The tracking power in this thing was just unbelievable. Truth would straight up do a 360-degree revolution like a fighter pilot. The proximity detonation was so generous that if you fired anywhere near the target, they were dead. And when the enemy team picked up Truth ammo in trials, you knew the round was lost. At number 17, we have one of the most powerful scout rifles in PvP history. Deadman's Tail launched as basically the best parts of a hand cannon combined with the range of a scout rifle. In its hipfire mode with a catalyst, it had an extremely fast rate of fire relative to its bullet damage with no accuracy penalties. At close to medium range, it rivaled the best hand cannons at the time and also dominated pulse rifles in the longer ranges. The exotic perk Cranial Spike would even let you 2-tap if you landed enough headshots. It could also roll with Vorpal Weapon, which allowed it to absolutely delete roaming supers in PvP before they even had a chance. Number 16 is one of the most powerful DPS exotics ever made in Destiny 2. When Anarchy was at its best, it output some really nice damage over time, but what made it truly unrivaled was that all of that damage was completely passive. This let you shoot out a couple of Anarchy shots onto a boss for some free damage, and then you could swap over to your special weapon to dish out a ton of extra damage while Anarchy was still ticking away in the background. Alongside the amazing DPS potential, it was also great for instantly clearing out big groups of enemies as they spawned. Number 15 is a sniper rifle that caused massive pain in the Trials of Osiris meta. Revoker was likely one of the main weapons that inspired Bungie to sunset hundreds of weapons in Destiny. It's a kinetic sniper rifle that completely breaks the ammo economy in PvP. When you miss a shot, it gets refunded back into the magazine. As you can imagine, this was absolutely busted in Trials since you'd only spawn in with 2 shots using normal sniper rifles. Despite sunsetting, Revoker is still a problematic weapon. It's resurfaced this season with the new ranked mode, especially when combined with the Titan exotic sight and ramparts. Not Forgotten was the pinnacle reward from the competitive playlist, which has now been reskinned as the ranked playlist. This legendary hand cannon has a perk called Magnificent Howl, which made it extremely good in PvP. It increased your damage for a few seconds after landing 2 precision shots. This meant that you could land a kill with just 2 headshots and then a body shot. For a 180 RPM hand cannon, this made Not Forgotten feature one of the fastest kill times in the entire game once you got the perk rolling. Sometimes you could even 2-tap Guardians. This was easily one of the best weapons in the Crucible at the time and was only rewarded to the best players, which created a massive gap between the best players and the average players. The next weapon on our list goes by many names. Early Destiny 1 players knew it as the Black Hammer, Guardians that joined after the Taken King expansion knew it as the Black Spindle, and everyone who's only played Destiny 2 knows it as Whisper of the Worm. In its most powerful state, Whisper would never run out of ammo as long as you kept hitting your precision shots. Every third precision hit would automatically refill the magazine from thin air. For boss DPS encounters, this was unbelievably effective. Whisper's ability to have infinite ammo has been nerfed multiple times now, but anyone who played with this weapon during its most OP state understands how meta-defining it really was. Number 12 is perhaps the first shotgun that truly became hated by the Destiny community. We're talking about Fellwinter's Lie, but not the really strong version that you know from Destiny 2. In Destiny 1, it was arguably even stronger. There is really no other time quite like the early days of Destiny 1 if you love shotguns. The one-shot kill range was substantially further than what we experience today. Fellwinters could roll a shot package which drastically reduced the pellet spread of shotguns, increasing the effective range. This thing would just map people in the Crucible and was a favorite weapon for shotgun enthusiasts. At number 11, we have a hand cannon that could take down a Guardian with a single lucky bullet. Back in Destiny 1, Hawkmoon had 2 perks that could work in tandem, Luck in the Chamber and a signature perk called Holding Aces. Luck in the Chamber would increase the damage of a random bullet in your magazine, and Holding Aces would cause 2 random bullets in your magazine to deal extra damage. Every once in a while, you get both of these perks to randomly apply to the same bullet. This would deal enough damage to one-shot a Guardian in PvP with a headshot. It was entirely unpredictable and brokenly overpowered, but it was incredible when you were the lucky one to have the RNG gods bless your magazine. Tragically, this weapon was only available for PlayStation in the first year of Destiny. After a year of exclusivity, Xbox players finally gained access just in time for Bungie to nerf the ability for all 3 of these lucky bullets to stack for the one tap. At number 10, we have a weapon that's recently caused a lot of discourse in the Destiny community. Ever since it was first introduced in the Garden of Salvation raid, Divinity has become a must-have weapon for any raid group. When one player hits a target with Divinity, it creates a giant cage that generates an automatic critical hit for teammates when they shoot it. Until recently, this applied a massive 30% debuff to the target. Even after the nerf to only 15% though, it will still be a very popular option for DPS phases against bosses because the cage makes it nearly impossible to miss your critical shots. This is especially helpful against bosses with tiny heads who like to move around quite a bit. Only Destiny 1 veterans will remember number 9. Pocket Infinity was an exotic fusion rifle that could be fired in full auto and would occasionally return ammo to the magazine while still firing. Instead of needing to charge up every bolt like a normal fusion rifle, bolts would flow out instantly from full auto mode. Imagine the rate of fire of the 4th Horseman exotic shotgun, but with the damage and range of a fusion rifle. This massive amount of burst damage was insane in PvP, at least when it worked correctly. Just like Telesto, Pocket Infinity experienced frequent bugs. Eventually, Pocket Infinity was nerfed into the ground, but we'll always have the memories of how ridiculous it was in early Destiny. At number 8, we have a sniper rifle that probably saved the most Nightfall runs compared to any weapon in Destiny history. Whisper of the Worm might have broken the game at times thanks to its ammo economy, but the Icebreaker was even worse. It was a very unique exotic sniper rifle that could only hold 6 bullets. No reserves, no magazine, no reloads. But the catch is that it would generate this ammo automatically for you over time. You didn't need to find special ammo at all, it would just be created for you. In PvE, we would sit far away from bosses and find little safe spots to snipe away with our infinite ammo. This removed all threat and challenge from much of the endgame content of Destiny 1. In fact, the main strat to beat the Oracle section of the original Vault of Glass raid was to have Guardians perch way up on the entrance with Icebreakers and snipe away at the Oracles as they popped up. In PvP, Bungie removed much of the special ammo over time from many game modes. Icebreaker was untouched by this by letting you continue to use the special ammo as a primary weapon. In Trials, this became a huge part of the meta as special ammo started to dwindle. At number 7, we have the original Weapon of Sorrow. Thorn was actually a laughably weak weapon when it was first added to Destiny 1. It had a very small magazine size and a slow reload speed. This was annoying for players because it was only granted from completing one of the more frustrating and rare quests in the game. An early Destiny 1 patch buffed Thorn by removing those issues and increasing its damage over time, and wow, did that make it effective. After its buff, you could perform a 2-tap walkaway with Thorn. You would hit someone in PvP with 2 headshots and they'd be left with so little health that they would just die to the tick damage. Once you saw that you landed 2 precision hits, you could just leave and start the next engagement because the kill was already yours. Plus, a single headshot with Thorn and an arc bolt grenade would get you a kill in PvP. It became one of the most popular and hated weapons to face in the early Trials of Osiris during the House of Wolves era. At number 6, we have a combination of 2 pinnacle weapons. Mountaintop and Recluse are 2 weapons that were likely a big inspiration for the great sunsetting event that happened with the launch of Beyond Light. Mountaintop is the only weapon in the game with a micro missile perk. This makes a grenade fly in a straight line with a massively increased projectile speed. It basically removed any remnants of skill required to account for the projectile arc and timing of a typical grenade launcher. Mountaintop would one-shot kill in PvP if the shot landed directly on your target, and even if it didn't, the blast radius was so wide that it would leave them with barely any health. This was perfect for a swap to Recluse to clean up the kill. Recluse was an overpowered SMG featuring the perk Master of Arms. Any weapon kill would dramatically increase its damage output for a few seconds. This combo was deadly in any activity. In PvE, you could blast away enemies with the Mountaintop and then clean up the red bars with Recluse in the blink of an eye. And in PvP, the Recluse had one of the fastest kill times of any primary weapon once the perk got rolling, which was easy to do when everyone had just a few points of health left after the Mountaintop blast. If you've ever thought that the last word was overpowered on Destiny 2, trust me, this thing had nothing compared to the original Destiny 1 version. The last word featured a perk that dramatically increased the damage output while firing from the hip. If you paired this with the aggressive ballistics barrel option, this meant that you could 2-tap with double 111s. This was no doubt powerful by itself, but the recoil and difficulty aiming precisely from the hip made it a bit difficult to pull off at any decent range. Here's where things get crazy though. The damage bonus from hip firing would often bug out, allowing you to land headshots while aiming down sights for 111 damage at blistering speeds and much further ranges. This would effectively be the same as deleting an enemy in PvP. As players started catching on to this crazy damage potential, usage in PvP started to spike. The last word dominated much of the early Trials of Osiris meta next to Thorn and Hawkmoon. At number 4, we have a sniper rifle that could kill you through walls. F-88 Spear was a sniper rifle from the Iron Banner that rolled with a perk called Final Round. This caused the last bullet in your magazine to deal a massive amount of extra damage, so much damage that you could one-shot someone in PvP just by hitting them anywhere on the body. No precision shots required. In early Trials of Osiris, players would start off the round by dumping off every shot in their magazine until there was only one left. That last shot would be the final round bullet that would give you an instant kill as long as you hit a player. This was extremely powerful all by itself, but what made things really crazy was that you could also roll with a perk called Armor Piercing Rounds. This allowed snipers to fire through almost any surface and hit the target behind it. I think you can probably imagine the chaos of a sniper rifle that could one hit to the body through any wall. PvP focused players grinded dearly for the sniper god roll, and it became a major issue in the Crucible until Bungie finally nerfed it. At number 3, we have a weapon that could either approve or deny your request to join any LFG group in early Destiny. The Gjallarhorn is probably the most famous weapon in Destiny history, up there with the iconic weapons like the Golden Gun from GoldenEye or BFG from Doom. And many players totally missed the opportunity to buy this weapon from Xur because they didn't think it was worth the strange coins. PvE endgame content in vanilla Destiny was pretty difficult, not because of complicated mechanics, but just because bosses were super chunky bullet sponges. In fact, Destiny was harshly criticized for this, and it took a long time to shake that reputation. But one epic rocket launcher came to the rescue. In addition to the normal rocket damage, the Gjallarhorn had Wolfpack rounds that would spread off and hit the target additional times for some massive total damage. It also featured tracking rockets, so it was pretty hard to miss even on bosses who like to strafe around the map. The power gap between Gjallarhorn and a regular old rocket launcher was so vast that players without it typically dealt way less damage, and therefore they became a lot less desirable to have in your fire team. It was such a divide that the looking for group websites became a bit toxic towards any players whose accounts hadn't been graced with the mighty Gjallarhorn. Exotics in early Destiny were very rare, and there was no way to farm for most of them in a deterministic way, so your best bet was to buy them from Xur with strange coins, which were fairly hard to come by. But if you missed the first time that he sold it, you were out of luck for several months. In fact, the wait was so painful that the community deemed the day that Xur finally sold this iconic rocket launcher as Gjallarhorn Day. This was to celebrate the turn of luck for everyone who had been struggling to acquire it via RNG. At number 2, we have a fusion rifle auto rifle hybrid that was so broken that it received a nerf only 4 weeks after being added to the game. The Vex Mythoclast was first introduced as a rare drop from the final boss of the Vault of Glass raid, but only on hard mode. You could only loot the raid once per character per week, and to even beat the raid you had to have an extremely geared up team with tons of coordination. This meant that most players never experienced this gun until long after it was nerfed. Vex shipped with an unbelievably fast time to kill in PvP. I mean, just watch the background gameplay here. If you were lucky enough to get this incredibly rare gun to drop, you could absolutely decimate Crucible lobbies. It was rightfully nerfed after only being available for around a month, and players who had the chance to use this gun and record its initial carnage have some of the most rare footage on gaming YouTube. It was changed many times in Destiny 1 and then later reintroduced, then buffed, then nerfed again in Destiny 2. But it will forever be remembered as one of the most overpowered weapons in Destiny history. And the number 1 most overpowered weapon in Destiny history burned a deep hole through the Crucible. Prometheus Lens was bugged when it was first added to Destiny 2 in a way that had it dealing way more damage than it was supposed to. This era in the first year of Destiny 2 featured a sandbox with some of the slowest PvP kill times in the history of the franchise. Players often complained that the only way to win games was to team shot in the back of the map with scout rifles or deathball together to never take a one-on-one fight. But Prometheus Lens dealt so much damage when it was first introduced that it was basically your only option if you wanted to have a glimmer of success in PvP. The carnage was so extreme that later Bungie created a special emblem for players who participated in the catastrophe. It dealt so much damage that you didn't even need to bother going for headshots, and even roaming supers with tons of damage resistance could get melted in fractions of a second. This laser tag weekend will never be forgotten by early Destiny 2 veterans. Destiny has been through some wild up and downs over the past 8 years or so, and a lot of new players haven't experienced many of the crazy things that veteran Destiny players have lived through. So today we're taking a look at many of the things that only veteran Destiny players know about. Did you know that mantling actually didn't exist in Destiny 1? That's right, the mechanic that has saved countless Guardian lives in Destiny 2 actually wasn't a thing in the original version of Destiny. I can't even tell you how many times during PvP or during a raid I would fall to my death because I would just barely miss that surface. It's definitely one of those things that veteran players out there really appreciate, and new players just don't know how good they have it. We can all get a little frustrated when we don't get the god roll that we're desperately seeking in Destiny 2, but luckily we do have crafting these days which will help us get the god roll on at least the craftable weapons. But for a short time back in Destiny 1, we actually had a weapon re-rolling system that was really popular. Many Guardians, including myself, spent thousands of materials re-rolling our weapons just to get that perfect roll. In particular, I probably spent thousands of motes trying to get the perfect roll on the sniper rifle Her Benevolence. In Destiny 2 though, we actually had a different kind of weapon re-rolling before the crafting system was ever born. In the old days, you could actually spend some materials to re-roll the masterwork on weapons. You couldn't pick it directly like you can in the new crafting system, but if you rolled it enough times, hopefully you would eventually get the one that you were looking for. I really wish this was a thing on modern weapons so that we could curb that RNG just a little bit. In Destiny 2, at the end of a PvP game, you can see whatever weapons that you got from the match. But in Destiny 1, you could see whatever anyone in the lobby would get as a drop, and every once in a while, some lucky person would get a crazy exotic drop like a Hawkmoon or a Gjallarhorn. If you've played the Grasp of Avarice dungeon in Destiny 2, you might be wondering where all these crazy engrams are coming from. Well, very early Destiny 1 players will definitely remember the original loot cave, which by far was the most efficient way to get legendary weapons in early Destiny 1. It didn't last all that long before Bungie nerfed it, but they did at least leave a little tribute to it.
1,000,000 deaths are not enough for Master Raoul.
Destiny 2 still has a lot of planetary materials, but in Destiny 1 these were incredibly important for many parts of the game. It was the only way to upgrade your weapons and armor, and you needed a lot of them to do so. They were so important that there's actually guides on YouTube of the most efficient routes to farm these, and many players would get really mad whenever another Guardian would run into the loop and start messing up their rotation. Back in Destiny 1, we had these things called ammo synthesis that we would use to fill up our ammo reserves. We had them for primary ammo, special ammo, and heavy ammo. It was basically like an early version of those raid banners, except every player was responsible for their own synthesis. The problem though is that these were on a cooldown timer, and if you wiped during a raid boss fight, you would lose some of your ammo. It was definitely one of the more frustrating parts of Destiny 1's endgame, and I'm really glad that we now have the raid banner system instead. These days in Destiny 2, every weapon's elemental type is predetermined, but in early Destiny 1 you could actually use a mod that would change the element. You could add these to any of the energy slot weapons that you had in your inventory. Arguably the hardest boss in all of Destiny 1 was this simple Vandal. He was nicknamed Randall of Vandal by the Destiny community because of his insane health pool. It would take your entire fireteam's ammo reserves many times over just to take him out. In Destiny 2, as soon as you get either a weapon or armor drop, you can basically use them at full effectiveness immediately. You might need to invest some materials to get them up to the maximum level, but as long as you have them, you can use them right away. But in Destiny 1, you actually had to gain XP to level these items up before you could use them and get access to all their perks. So if you got a roll on a weapon that you really wanted to test out because they got a cool perk combination, that meant that you had to spend a lot of XP on that weapon in order to fully try it. Back when Destiny 2 first launched, there was actually no special ammo at all. The special ammo weapons we think of today like snipers, shotties, and fusion rifles were actually in the power slot. This meant that if you wanted to use a sniper in PvP, you had to choose between a rocket launcher and your favorite sniper rifle. Personally, I still like to go with the sniper, but most of the people out there would just use a grenade launcher. When the Forsaken expansion finally came around, they reintroduced special ammo and brought back snipers, fusion rifles, shotguns, and breech-loaded grenade launchers to be options that use special ammo. The last word has been complained about in one sense or another pretty much ever since the very beginning of Destiny. Modern players might think the hipfire accuracy is too generous, and when it first came back into Destiny 2, it was almost like a machine gun when you're aiming down sights on PC. But without a doubt, the most broken time in the last word's history was actually in vanilla Destiny 1. It would gain bonus damage while hip firing just like today, but those bullets would do 111 damage. And what made it truly broken is that it would often glitch out and give you that 111 even while you're aiming down sights. This was easily one of the most powerful weapons in early Destiny 1 and cemented the exotic hand cannon meta. Alongside the last word during this exotic hand cannon meta was Thorn. In very early Destiny 1, this thing wasn't considered to be too hot by the community and it only came with 6 shots in the magazine. But after a buff, the usage really shot up in the Crucible and people realized that they could 2-tap. If you landed both headshots in PvP, that burn damage was just enough to take out your enemy. And what was perhaps even more powerful is that you could get a headshot with a Thorn and then land an arc bolt grenade for an easy cleanup. If you started playing Destiny anytime after the first year or so of its lifespan, you would probably recognize Nolan North's voice as the same as your Ghost. But that actually wasn't the case during very early Destiny 1. The original Ghost was voiced by Peter Dinklage from Game of Thrones. When the Taken King expansion came out, Nolan redid all of the voice lines from the original Ghost. Back in Destiny 1, each class had their own unique materials required to upgrade their armor. Warlocks had Hadronic Essence, Hunters had Sapphire Wire, and Titans had Plasteel Plating. Later on though, these were all simplified into a single material. In both Destiny 1 and modern Destiny, you're probably accustomed to chasing your own perfect god roll, but in year 1 of Destiny 2, there was actually no such thing as a god roll because every single weapon was a static roll. Bungie experimented with taking away random rolls and the community really didn't like it in general. So about a year after Destiny 2 came out, the random rolls were back. You might think of the Cryptarch in the tower as your friendly neighborhood vendor, but back in Destiny 1, this guy was absolutely hated. That's because you would often bring him a legendary engram and he would convert it all the way down to a blue. But every once in a while, if it was your lucky day, he might take a blue and turn it into a purple or even an exotic. Leave a comment down below if you remember what Forever 29 means. If you were playing during the first year of Destiny and experiencing the very first Vault of Glass raid, you probably remember how tough it was to get the exact armor you needed to drop. That's because the only way to reach the maximum level of 30, which was the first power level cap at the very beginning of Destiny 1, you had to get the exact right drops from the hard mode version of Vault of Glass. This was particularly frustrating as a player because there was no way to get around this. If you didn't get lucky, you were stuck for another week at 29. This frustration led many players to making 3 of the exact same class so they had 3 chances each week to get those drops. In Destiny 2, if you want to play Trials of Osiris, all you have to do is buy the card that you want from Save 14 and then go hop into the playlist. But in Destiny 1, there's a few more decisions to be made. Back then, we had a currency called Passage Coins and something called boons that could be purchased with them. You would use these things to upgrade your Trials card, like for example buying a Mercy to forgive your first loss, buying your very first win for free on the card, or getting a 2-for-1 special. In Destiny 1, Xur was quite a bit harder to find on the map than he is today, and it was definitely worth finding him because he had some really great stuff to sell. For example, he sold one of the best guns in the game, the Horn, in very early Destiny, and many players didn't even know how good it was yet because no one had tried it. So for several months to come, players missed out on LFG groups because they didn't have this rocket launcher. But Xur also sold some really cool consumables. For example, he had something called 3 of Coins, which would increase your chances at your next exotic, or Glass Needles, which could be used to reroll your exotic armor. You might think special weapons are annoying in Destiny 2, but in Destiny 1 there was a perk called Final Round which made them even more powerful. At the beginning of any Trials of Osiris match, you would hear people shooting off their sniper shots into the distance, and when they activated the perk Final Round, for example with their Effort Eat Spear, they could one-shot you to the body. This was by far one of the more frustrating parts of the Trials meta for many months. Another meta that was really frustrating to deal with was the Pocket Infinity. This was maybe the buggiest weapon in all of Destiny 1, and it also was one of the most powerful. After you charge up your first fusion rifle shot, it would empty the rest of the magazine in auto fire mode. Luckily, this thing was pretty rare because not many people got the exotic bounty to get it, but wow, it sure melted Guardians incredibly fast. Another one of the most frustrating bosses in Destiny history was actually a simple object. The simple forklift found in the Sparrow Racing League was one of the most dangerous objects in the entire game. Many modern Destiny 2 players will complain about how difficult some of the Grandmaster Nightfalls are, but the regular old Nightfalls from Destiny 1 were arguably just as hard in some situations. These would come with particular burns that made some of them incredibly difficult. Having Arc Burn on, for example, against the Hive meant that you were taking 3 times the normal damage from those Hive wizards. And if your full fire team wiped at the same time, you go right back to orbit just like modern Grandmasters. The upside though was that if you managed to beat these, you got a sweet glow over your head for the whole rest of the week that you could show off from the tower. If you played during early Destiny 1, there's a chance you might remember the very first and only Queen's Wrath event. This had some unique bounties and some really great weapons. In particular, it dropped the Supremacy Sniper Rifle, which is probably my favorite sniper in all of Destiny 1. This one is one of the more annoying parts of Destiny 1. Many players might have forgotten this, but there's actually a cooldown to how often you could sprint in Destiny. If you sprinted long enough and then went back to walking, there was about a 2-second cooldown where you couldn't sprint again. Later on, they actually implemented an artifact you could use that would get rid of this effect. Luckily, this is not something to worry about in Destiny 2. Speaking of artifacts, Destiny 1 had all kinds of different artifacts from the Iron Lords that you could use to change your character. There was one that would take away your super but give you an extra grenade and melee charge and some small boosts to your stats. There was one that improved your radar, one that let you reflect things with your sword, one that helped you resist damage over time things in the Crucible, and definitely the most famous and frustrating one was the Memory of Scory. When your super was full, you could charge your teammates' supers faster just by standing close to each other. This became a huge problem in Trials of Osiris. Another thing that became a huge issue in Trials of Osiris was the Icebreaker. This was the exotic sniper rifle that could recharge its own ammo just by waiting around. But it's probably actually better known for its ability to cheese bosses. If you could find a safe spot during pretty much any boss fight in the entire game, you could sit there with your Icebreaker and plink away until the boss eventually died. In early Destiny 1, the perk Armor Piercing Rounds did a lot more than it does today. It would actually allow you to shoot through solid objects, including walls. Once people got wind of this in the Crucible, everyone's new favorite strategy was the wall bang. I have to admit, I probably got several hundred of these kills and it was really fun to do, although I'm glad it's not in the game anymore. One of the most popular ways to play Warlock in early Destiny 1 was to use the Viking Funeral build. This would double the length of how long things burned you in PvP. So Guardians would use the last word along with a Firebolt grenade to hit one shot and then let you burn to death. It was without a doubt one of the most powerful PvP builds at the time. In early Destiny 2, there was a Trials of the Nine mode called Countdown. This was clearly inspired by tactical shooters like Counter-Strike and had kind of a mixed reaction from the community. Some people absolutely loved it and many definitely hated it. I don't know if it was the right fit for Trials, but I do give Bungie props for trying different modes. Back in Destiny 1, the 3 factions actually made a really big difference in the game. You could only pledge to one at a time per character, and some of the weapons that they had were really good. I remember spending hours and hours on the Cosmodrome farming XP just to get my next drop from Dead Orbit. They also had some really rare shaders and ships that were highly coveted by the community. You might think that we have a lot of borderline useless materials in Destiny 2, but Destiny 1 definitely had its own fair share. There's so many of these that have been left behind. We had Motes of Light, Radiant Energy and Shards, Ascendant Energy, Strange Coins, Glass Needles, 3 of Coins, Passage Coins, Telemetries to level up all of your different weapons faster, Consumables to get Glimmer from particular mobs like Black Wax Idol, Ether Seeds and Resupply Codes, Reputation Boosters from the Crucible and the Vanguard, and on and on. If there's one thing we know that Bungie loves to do, it is making new materials and consumables. One of the systems I'd really love to see Bungie bring back from Destiny 1 was the Skeleton Key system. You would use these keys to get specific loot at the end of strikes. For example, Guardians would spend an endless amount of time trying to get a perfect Imago loop to drop from the Undying Mind strike. This system could bring a lot of relevancy back to Destiny 2 strikes. One of the cooler things ever added to Destiny was the introduction of the EV30 Tumbler Sparrow. This thing could do some amazing stunts and really opened up the creativity of the community. I'll never forget when Guardians first used this thing to cross that entire chasm in the middle of the moon. For a short while in Destiny 1 after the Hammer Titan was introduced, there was a glitch where you could throw the hammers incredibly fast. It was pretty funny to do and could definitely melt a boss if you're able to pull it off. One of the most satisfying feats in all of Destiny 1 was to pull off the infamous one tap with the Hawk Moon. It came with 3 lucky bullets in the magazine, and every once in a while you could get the stars to align and have all 3 of those lucky bullets land on the same person. This would result in the infamous one tap in PvP. Back in Destiny 1, certain primary weapons actually had elemental damage. These were incredibly useful but also very rare because they only came from Trials of Osiris or raids. Later on, most primary weapons didn't come with an elemental burn, so if you had any of these early ones, they were particularly special. Engrams back in Destiny 1 would actually tell you what slot they would drop in before you decrypted them. So for example, if you had a class item or a special weapon or a heavy weapon, you could tell what you were about to get from Rahul. The speaker in Destiny 1 had some of the best class item drip available in the whole game. I still remember saving up my materials trying to get some of those awesome hunter cloaks he had for sale. One of the things many Destiny 1 players have probably forgotten is that you actually had to go to orbit before you could pick any new activities. These days you can be chilling in the tower and then pick a Crucible game or a strike or go to some planet, but back then you had to go all the way to orbit before you could choose your next activity. There was a secret basketball room in the King's Fall raid that the community went absolutely wild over. We thought this would lead to more cool secrets and people spent hours and hours trying to figure it out, but it turned out it was just for fun. And last on our list is an exotic bounty that many players wish they could forget. A Light in the Dark was the bounty that was required to get the original Thorn hand cannon, and part of this quest was to get 500 points in PvP using only void damage. But the thing that really rubbed people the wrong way is that deaths would make you lose progress. Over the next few months, Reddit was absolutely full of posts with people complaining about how tough this bounty was to pull off. I still remember using the Atheon's Epilogue to finish mine, and that was during a time where the Hunters didn't even have a Void subclass yet. Destiny 2 has featured some great weapons overall, but many of the ones coming from the Crucible vendor Lord Shaxx have been a bit underwhelming. But in Destiny 1, we had some amazing weapons from the Crucible Quartermaster vendor. After all, that's where the original Palindrome came from, which is now a top pick in Destiny 2. So in this video, we're taking a look at some of the most popular Crucible weapons from Destiny 1 and thinking about how they might fit into the modern sandbox. Starting in year 1 of D1, we have the Lord High Fixer. This is a 140 RPM hand cannon equivalent with a cult-like following. Along with a nice looking weapon model, it had access to some staple hand cannon perks like Rangefinder, Send It, and Third Eye, which made it a formidable weapon in the Crucible. Headshot enthusiasts often enjoyed using Outlaw because we didn't have nearly as many reload helpers back in D1. The perk Quick Draw would help when pairing it with a slower handling special weapon, and it had access to explosive rounds which weren't quite as popular back in D1, but we now understand the power of the flinch delivered from this perk. It also had a number of damage boosting perks like Crowd Control, Final Round, Luck in the Chamber, and Reactive Reload. So how good would the Lord High Fixer be today? Well, we have some incredible competition in the 140 RPM hand cannon department. The Palindrome, Fatebringer, and now the IS Luna lead the legendary categories, so the Lord High Fixer would have to bring some really impressive stats and perks to make some waves. Okay, next up on our list is the weapon that you might want to defend yourself in a doomsday scenario, the Zombie Apocalypse. In early Destiny 1, the perk Field Scout would let you hold a crazy amount of heavy ammo for your machine gun in PvP. If you were careful with how you spent it, you could run around for basically the entire match with heavy ammo. It also had access to aggressive ballistics, which made each of the bullets hit harder. In Destiny 2, barrel options don't increase the damage anymore, but in Destiny 1, that was actually a thing. The Zombie had a rate of fire stat of 77, which would put it just a bit faster than the 450 RPM Thunderlord, but not quite as fast as the 900 RPM beast like the Thermal Erosion. I'd love to see this archetype return in Destiny 2 to bridge that RPM gap for machine guns. Next up is one of my favorite early auto rifles in Destiny 1, the Grim Citizen. This was a 77 rate of fire auto rifle in Destiny 1, which would match the base fire rate of the Suros regime. It had some great consistency perks like Persistence, Rangefinder, Perfect Balance, and Hammer Forged. And it also had Reactive Reload, which was the D1 version of Kill Clip. You could pair this with Outlaw for some incredible lethality and fast reloads. Although it might not have been as popular as the Suros or the Shadow Price in the first auto rifle meta of D1, it was a great weapon overall, and I'd love to see it return in D2 as another solid option in the auto rifle category. The final boss was a 37 rate of fire sniper, which would match up with the current 140 RPM Praetor's Revenge. It had the famous ambush and short gaze sights, which were community favorites in D1, and it had unflinching to cut down on the incoming flinch while you were scoped. It also had snapshot for the faster ADS speed. The final column perks weren't great for a sniper, but occasionally Clown Cartridge would get you some extra kills with that larger magazine. These 140 RPM snipers in Destiny 2 did have their time in the sun back around Forsaken with the Supremacy and the Twilight Oath, but these days they require 3 body shots to land a kill, so they just aren't being used all that much in PvP. For the Vooper fans out there, D1 also had a fantastic fusion rifle called the 77 Wizard. This was the first fusion rifle that I really remember dominating PvP in vanilla Destiny 1. With options like rangefinder, hipfire grip, perfect balance, and hammer forged, you can get an incredible fusion rifle in your hands if you got lucky with the right roll. It was on the slower end of the charge spectrum, featuring a high impact stat, and this meant that you had to anticipate your target's movement. But if you managed to learn the timing and the bolt pattern, you could absolutely map someone with this fusion. I would put this thing up there with the Praetorian foil and the original Pocket Infinity for the fusions that I remember most nostalgically in Destiny 1. I'd love to see it make a comeback in Destiny 2 at some point, especially since we've recently seen fusions climbing up in the meta thanks to our friend Xur. Moving on to the Dark Below expansion, we have the classic pulse rifle with 3 Ys, the 123 Syzygy. This was a high rate of fire pulse rifle similar to the modern day Darkest Before. In early Destiny 1, pulse rifles didn't see a whole lot of action compared to auto rifles and the famous exotic hand cannons. Here's our favorite lore master Byf explaining the lay of the land back in the very early days of Destiny PvP.
Now, here's the problem. Nobody uses pulse rifles. Pulse rifles right now are one of the most underrepresented groups of weapons in the game. In fact, I believe they are the most underrepresented groups of weapons in the game.
The only pulses that got much attention back then were the Red Death and the Bad Juju, and that's basically thanks to their exotic perks. So despite this particular one not getting a whole lot of love at the time, it actually had the makings for a great pulse rifle when it would later be buffed in patch 1.1.1.
Yeah, boy.
It had access to full auto, which was really helpful on such a fast-firing pulse. It had rangefinder to help with the effective range, counterbalance to control the recoil, reactive reload for that extra damage after a kill, and third eye for players who never wanted to lose their radar. While it certainly wasn't a gun that defined the meta, it was a solid pulse rifle in the same archetype that later did dominate the meta with options like the Grasp of Moloch and later the Clever Dragon. These are in a pretty good spot in Destiny 2 right now, with the Grid Skipper and the Darkest Before being great dueling options. And I think we can always enjoy another fast-firing pulse rifle, especially if it comes with access to kill clip for those clean 2 bursts. Next up is one of my personal favorite machine guns in all of Destiny history, Against All Odds. This was a heavy-hitting 61 impact beast that could roll with some incredible perks. From what I recall, the extra damage from aggressive ballistics and the barrel options would actually allow you to 3-tap with the heavy-hitting machine guns. It also had the perk Take a Knee, which made the unruly machine guns much easier to manage while you're crouched. Field Scout would allow you to run around with entirely too much heavy ammo, and reactive reload could increase the damage even further if you had enough ammo to reload after a kill. This was a fantastic machine gun in Destiny 1, but we don't really see the 360 RPM options being used all that often in D2. It seems like most players find the 450s a bit easier to use, but who knows, maybe if Against All Odds comes back someday, it could change that. One of the funniest names for any D1 weapon was the Trolley Problem. Bravo to whoever at Bungie named that one. There's not a whole lot to say about this weapon since it's very similar to the 77 Wizard, which we already covered, but just a little bit less impact and a faster charge rate. But hey, if they want to add it back, I'm not going to complain about more fusion rifle options to try in PvP. 2 to the Morgue was a 14 rate of fire shotgun that I believe would be similar to the lightweight frame shotguns in Destiny 2. So while it lacked a bit compared to the Fellwinter's Lie for the one-shot kill range, it did make up for it with a faster follow-up shot. It could roll with a number of great shotgun perks. Luck in the Chamber would randomly buff one of the shots to deal some extra damage, which could help you land that one-hit kill. It was the same deal with Final Round, except that one would automatically apply the bonus damage to the very last shot. Knee pads was a great perk on shotguns to increase the slide distance, similar to modern day Stompies but built right into the weapon. It also had quick draw to help swap weapons faster or hammer forge to help max out the range. And most importantly, it had Shot Package, which Destiny 2 players have come to either love or hate on the reissued Fellwinter's Lie. 2 to the Morgue was a great and very popular shotgun in its prime, and if they gave it a lightweight frame bonus in Destiny 2, I think this one would instantly become a very popular pick. Next up is one of the more popular snipers in Destiny history, the Longbow Synthesis. If you have some extra time on your hands, go watch some past YouTube videos of just how many players freaked out when trying to get this elusive sniper to drop with an S roll. It battled the LDR 5001 as the premier sniper in PvP for quite a while, and for good reason. With a generous aim assist stat, community favorite sites like Ambush and Short Gaze, and some great perks, it was just a beast of a sniper. It had access to Unflinching to cut down on the incoming flinch, Snapshot to improve the ADS speed, and Hidden Hand to provide some extra aim assist. We've recently seen the 1000 Yard Stare making a big comeback in Destiny 2, and I'd love to see the famous Longbow make a return someday as well. I think it would immediately be a very coveted weapon as long as it had Snapshot. Moving on to the House of Wolves expansion, I feel like this is by far the most forgettable list of the Crucible vendor weapons. I do recall coming up against a few of these different names, but I guess the sheer dominance of the meta weapons like the Last Word, Thorn, Hawkmoon, and the Messenger casts a pretty huge shadow on these options. If you think any of these weapons deserve to be on the list, let me know in the comments. In Destiny 1 Year 2, the meta shifted quite a bit thanks to some big balance changes. The sidearm fans out there will rejoice at our next weapon on the list, the Havoc Pigeon. This was a challenger to the Iron Wreath D that came from the Iron Banner. Sidearms in Destiny 1 were interesting because they consumed special ammo instead of primary ammo. This meant that if you wanted to use one, you were giving up your shotgun, sniper, or fusion rifle, but the payoff if you were adept with the sidearms was pretty high. In particular, they became popular pairings with a No Land Beyond sniper rifle that consumed primary ammo. The Havoc Pigeon could roll with Rangefinder to bump out its effective range or some damage perks to increase the lethality after a kill. It also had access to Battle Runner, which was an interesting perk to speed up your sprint speed after you landed a kill. Sidearms were recently buffed in D2 on PC by changing them to always be hitscan weapons, and they've always been pretty scary in the hands of a good console player as well. So I'd love to see this model with a suppressor make it back into Destiny 2. I can't make this list without briefly touching on how insane rockets used to be in Destiny 1 PvP. The Smolder was just one of these rockets which could roll with the perk Grenades and Horseshoes, which made rockets explode with proximity detonation to the target. This perk alone made rockets a terrifying weapon to face in the Crucible, and the Smolder could also roll a tripod to give you 3 rockets in the tube. We don't have this perk available on legendary rockets in Destiny 2, and maybe that's a good thing, but if the Smolder ever did come back into the game with proximity detonation, it would instantly be a top pick for the heavy slot. And of course, we can't talk about Year 2 PvP without mentioning the infamous meta pulse rifle, the Hawksaw. This pulse came during an interesting era in Destiny just after the exotic hand cannon trio of the Last Word, Hawkmoon, and Thorn had been nerfed. Hawksaw was easy to use, had some options for a very clean sight aesthetic, and had some great perks. You could build it out with high stability or high range with perks like Counterbalance, Rangefinder, Perfect Balance, and Hammer Forged. And if you needed extra aim assist, you could get it from the perk Hidden Hand. You could also get your inner accuracy from Icarus. It was one of those weapons that just felt great to use and defined the meta for a decent period of time in early Year 2. Unfortunately for the Hawksaw, it featured the same archetype as the modern 450 RPM pulse rifles like the Bat Juju. In Destiny 2 right now, this archetype is really struggling to keep up with some of the better options. If this archetype ever got a buff though, I could see Hawksaw making a huge splash in the meta once again. Moving on to Year 3 Crucible weapons, the most noteworthy guns here are actually already back in Destiny 2, the Palindrome and IS Luna. These hand cannons heavily dominated the meta for a long period of time, and PvP fans were ecstatic to get a nice roll on either of them. But we did have a few other Year 3 Crucible weapons that were worth noting. The Event Horizon was a high impact sniper similar to the modern day Frozen Orbit. It could roll a snapshot or quick draw to improve the ADS speed and Hidden Hand to improve aim assist. If you were a crack shot, you could also proc the perk Perfectionist, which would refund all of your shots if you only landed precision kills. This was definitely a rare occurrence, but it was a pretty cool idea for a perk. Shout out to one of my favorite snipers of all time, the Stillpiercer. The Hexcaster was a bullet hose auto rifle like the Atheon's Epilogue or Doctrine of Passing. Unfortunately, this archetype never made it into Destiny 2 since the 900 RPM auto rifles would perhaps overlap too much with SMGs. I'd love to see this archetype come into Destiny 2 at some point, and I think they'd be incredibly fun to use. The Hexcaster could get Rangefinder to extend its range or Persistence to improve accuracy the longer you fired. You could build it out for stability or range, and it also had Third Eye to keep your radar up while you're aiming down sights. Destiny has featured some incredible weapons in the Iron Banner loot pool, but many of the community favorites have actually never made their way into Destiny 2 yet. In this video, I wanted to take a look at some of the past Iron Banner weapons and theorycraft how good they might be if they were ported over to Destiny 2. This isn't to say that we haven't had some amazing Iron Banner weapons in Destiny 2. A Godroll Hero's Burden, for example, is the strongest SMG in the game in my opinion. And of course, we've already had the legendary Felwinter's Lie dominate PvP for many seasons since coming back into the game. But there's so many amazing ones that haven't shown up yet, so let's take a look at a few of the top picks starting off with Year 1 Iron Banner weapons in vanilla Destiny. First on our list is an absolute legend in the sniping category that changed the meta in many ways when it was released, the Aphrodite Spear. I have quite a bit to say about this one as it was one of the most meta-defining weapons in the history of Destiny for many reasons. This was a high-impact sniper similar to the Frozen Orbit of modern Destiny. It had a fantastic range stat, and as we now know, a high range stat really helps the aim assist cone stay magnetic over a longer distance. Aphrodite started out one of the most funny and most annoying metas of early Destiny, the armor-piercing round wallbangs. For those of you who didn't play during this era, this was the time in Destiny where armor-piercing round weapons literally allowed you to shoot through thin walls and objects. This allowed you to land easy kills on enemies that literally couldn't do anything back to you. Picture Nuke from CS 1.6 for my fellow Counter-Strike fans out there. Not only were armor-piercing rounds incredibly powerful by themselves, but Aphrodite also had access to the perk Final Round. Here, the last bullet in your magazine would deal bonus damage similar to Destiny 2's High Impact Reserve perk, but even more deadly. For quite a long time, you'd hear a majority of Trials matches starting off with sniper ammo shots being fired off across the map. Players would dump the first 2 bullets of their 3-round magazine so that their last shot could one-hit kill to the body, and if you had armor-piercing rounds as well, you could do this through walls. It was an absolutely ridiculous meta that rightfully got nerfed over time. After the changes, armor-piercing rounds couldn't shoot through nearly as many objects anymore, and Final Round was changed to only buff precision damage. As annoying as it was in the meta, I have to admit it was pretty hilarious wallbanging enemies with a single body shot before it became the crutch of literally every Trials team trying to reach the lighthouse. Even though the armor-piercing round Final Round combo was certainly very strong, there was actually another role that was more rare but perhaps equally powerful for players who knew how it worked. Effort Eats also had access to both Double Down and Field Scout. With this combo, players would start a Trials match with their Double Down Field Scout Effort Eats Spear out to maximize their sniper ammo on the start of a match. Then after the first round, they would switch snipers to whatever their preferred normal PvP role was. Unlike Destiny 2, back in early Destiny, you didn't lose all of your special ammo as long as you swap weapons either while you were dead or between rounds. This made Effort Eats a very popular pick for the first round in Trials, even if a player would swap to a different sniper for subsequent rounds. Whether you are abusing one-shot wallbang kills, spawning in with maximum sniper ammo for an entire match, or just using a nice PvP role, there's no doubt that Effort Eats was a meta-defining sniper. But in Destiny 2, how good would it actually be? We've seen a rise in the popularity of high-impact snipers with options like the Frozen Orbit, but Effort Eats actually had a fairly low aim assist stat compared to many competitive snipers, and the gimmicks that made it so popular back in Destiny 1 probably wouldn't work in the Destiny 2 sandbox, so I think it would definitely be used for some nostalgia, but probably not anywhere near the strength of its original entry into the franchise. The Timur's Lash was a high-impact hand cannon in Destiny 1 similar to the Steady Hand. I'll never forget running a strike with a friend in early Destiny using this thing when my friend asked me, "What the heck are you using?" as I popped about 20 drag heads off in a row. The fun thing about this gun was that you could roll the perks in many different ways to be excellent in PvE or PvP. You had the typical options like Outlaw and Crowd Control, which was a D1 Rampage, or Reactive Reload, which was D1 Kill Clip. But you could also go for a more rangy role with perks like Send It and Rangefinder, and it had some great options like Quick Draw, Explosive Rounds, and Luck in the Chamber to open up a lot of great possibilities for PvP. Not to mention, it also had that lengthy barrel model, which as we know today is actually a real benefit in Destiny. So how good would Timur's Lash be in the current sandbox? Well, 120 RPMs have certainly had their time to shine in Forsaken with True Prophecy, the Steady Hand, the Bottom Dollar, and the Igneous Hammer. Although these are still great options in general, they aren't the same meta slayers compared to much of last year. But since Timur's had Reactive Reload, it could potentially compete with some of the remaining 120s that can still 2-tap like the Criminal's Dagger and Loud Lullaby. With some really nice perks available and a great weapon model, I think it could actually be fairly popular in the current sandbox. Jolder's Hammer was a heavy-hitting machine gun that dominated the heavy slot in PvP for quite a while after being released. Back in Destiny 1, the aggressive ballistics barrel option actually gave you more impact, so if you paired this with Crowd Control, you could wipe an entire team pretty fast with the outgoing damage. It also had options like Hidden Hand for more aim assist, Counterbalance and Rodeo to control the recoil, and Persistence to improve accuracy while firing continuously. It also had the perk Take a Knee, which was similar to our modern Firmly Planted perk. This was a crazy great perk that would reduce recoil, improve aim down sight speeds, and reduce flinch while crouched, as well as improving accuracy. Jolder's was a beast in D1 PvP, but how good would it be today? Generally, machine guns are dominated by the 450 RPM options like the Commemoration or the Corrective Measure. We did recently get the Archon's Thunder, which is a slower firing 360, but it's not seen all that often in PvP. On paper, the 900 RPMs are actually the best options for kill time, but it can be tough to control their recoil at a high rate of fire. I think Jolder's could be interesting in Destiny 2, but unless it was a stat monster, I'm not sure how much of a splash it would really make. Also in the heavy slot, we had the Radagast Fury. This was an Iron Banner rocket launcher that could roll with the classic Destiny 1 PvP perk, Grenades and Horseshoes. This made landing rocket hits trivially easy because you could just aim directly at enemies instead of having to jump up in the air and shoot down at the ground like Halo. Grenades and Horseshoes rockets in Destiny 1 were some of the most free kills that you could possibly get, and they gave you an insane amount of super energy per kill. So smart players would spend their super first and then get a few heavy kills to get most of the way back to their next super in just a few seconds. It also had access to Clown Cartridge, so if you got lucky, you could actually reload and get an extra rocket. Javelin was available to increase the rocket velocity, and Heavy Payload increased the blast radius. Rockets seem to have become a bit more popular recently in Destiny 2, but it's really just the big exotics like the Wardcliff Coil and the Gallarhorn that are getting the spotlight. Destiny 2 legendary rockets just don't have the same multi-kill potential as pulling 4 rockets from a single heavy crate in Destiny 1. This is another weapon that I think wouldn't get a ton of love in PvP unless it came with some crazy version of grenades and horseshoes for the proximity detonation. Silimar's Wrath was a max rate of fire auto rifle similar to the bullet hose Atheon's Epilogue. It has some really solid perks like counterbalance, perfect balance, and fitted stock for recoil control, and persistence for accuracy. It could also get some really nice damage perks like reactive reload, crowd control, or glass half full. Theoretically, I believe you could even get a roll with multiple damage perks. We've seen how powerful that can be in Destiny 2 with weapons like the Kindled Orchid rocking Kill Clip and Rampage at the same time. I would really love to see some of these 900 RPM bullet hoses make their way into Destiny 2 at some point. I think they'd play so well in the current sandbox, and there's a number of infamous ones to pick from like the Silimars, the Epilogue, the Doctrine, and of course the Necrochasm. My final pick from the Year 1 Iron Banner weapons was the Scori's Revenge. This was a high rate of fire pulse like the Grasp of Moloch or the modern day Darkest Before. This pulse had a ton of great consistency perks to control the recoil and damage perks to boost the lethality, but it also had some more rare perks like Secret Round, where missing a shot from the burst would fire an extra bullet. Maybe not the strongest option out there, but it was definitely an interesting idea. We've seen these high rate of fire pulses perform pretty well recently with options like the Darkest Before and the Grid Skipper. I don't think they would come in and dominate the meta by any means, but it still could be a pretty nice dueling option to add to the Destiny 2 arsenal. Moving on to Year 2 Iron Banner weapons, we have the Nerwin's Mercy, easily one of the most popular Iron Banner weapons in Year 2. Tons of you wrote in the Nerwin's Mercy on my tweet asking which Iron Banner weapons you'd like to try out in Destiny 2. Nerwin's was a 66 rate of fire pulse rifle, which I believe would map over to the current 390 RPM pulses in Destiny 2. Like most of the other Iron Banner weapons, it also had some great perks. Depending on your role, you could build it for stability, range, or utility regeneration. It also had Third Eye to keep your radar up at all times even while aiming down sights to improve your awareness. The main thing I remember about this pulse is just how consistent and forgiving it felt. Sure, maybe it wouldn't insta-kill an enemy across the map like the Messenger, but it was just such a consistent feeling weapon. I think consistency and forgiveness is something we don't really value enough in Destiny 2 weapons. It's easy to just look at a spreadsheet and determine the optimal time to kill, but if a weapon feels good and easy to use and is pretty forgiving, it can really help you to win some duels. I think if Nerwin's made it into Destiny 2, it would definitely give some favorite pulses in that category a run for their money, but it certainly wouldn't hold a candle to something like a Desperado Messenger in the lethality department. Finala's Peril was a 140 RPM equivalent hand cannon from the Iron Banner, which would be similar to the Ice Luna. It was packed with perks that allowed it to be used in many different ways, and like the Timur's Lash, it featured quite a long barrel. Most notably, it had access to Rangefinder, which the community has crowned an S tier perk for PvP hand cannons. It also had perks like Hammer Forged, Hand Loaded, and Rifled Barrel to extend the range, as well as explosive rounds. There's a constant discussion in D2 endgame PvP circles about which perk is better, Rangefinder or Explosive Payload. Well, Finales could actually get both. It could also get Icarus for some improved in-air accuracy, which was fairly rare on Destiny 1 hand cannons. It could get Hidden Hand for some extra aim assist and reactive reload or Luck in the Chamber for more lethality. Overall, it was just a great hand cannon, and we've seen 140s really rise in prominence again with the Palindrome, the Fatebringer, and now the Ice Luna. So I think a good roll on the Finales could definitely fit right into the picture. Next on our list is the Iron Wreath D. This was a great option for any Guardian wanting to roleplay as James Bond with the Silence PP7. In Destiny 1, sidearms occupied the special ammo slot and were an interesting alternative to the typical snipers, shotguns, and fusions seen in PvP. The Iron Wreath in particular was a scary sidearm in the hands of good player. I want to specifically shout out KJ Hovey, who is probably my favorite YouTuber in Destiny 1. He was a menace with the No Land Beyond and the Iron Wreath together. This sidearm in a lot of ways filled a similar role to that of the Last Word. It could shut down shotgun rushers if you could keep your distance and backpedal effectively. And with lethality perks like crowd control or reactive reload, one kill could definitely turn into multiple. It also featured quick draw, which made it especially good for pairing with a long range weapon like the No Land Beyond, a pulse rifle, or a scout rifle. Today, we've seen a few sidearms work really well, especially when paired with a sniper rifle. They seem to be more popular on console than PC, but players who are talented with a sidearm and know how to master their effective range can be really frustrating to play against. The Hawkins Hatchet was an 88 rate of fire auto rifle, which was on the faster side of the RPM spectrum, but not quite the bullet hose like the Silimar's Wrath. I don't want to go into crazy depth on this one, but we've seen the 720 RPM auto rifles playing pretty well in the meta recently, albeit not quite as hot as that season where the 600 RPM auto rifles like the Gnawing Hunger were dominating the meta. In Destiny 1, this auto had a lot of great roles to optimize for range with perks like Rangefinder, Hand Loaded, and Rifled Barrel. And that's where these auto rifles tend to struggle a bit in the current sandbox since they share a lot of optimal range with SMGs, which are just a bit easier to use. So if it came back with some really solid range and lethality perks, I think it could find a nice spot in the meta, but it wouldn't be game breaking by any means. In Year 3, we had some of the coolest looking Iron Banner guns in my opinion. I just love the aesthetics of many of these, and some of them were very powerful as well. Starting off with the Unbent Tree, this was another bullet hose archetype of auto rifle. We've already covered the Silumars, so I don't want to go into crazy depth here, but essentially I'd love to see this archetype return into Destiny 2, whether that's bringing back some of our old favorites or introducing some new bullet hoses for us to enjoy. I think with a nice high range roll, these could be incredibly fun to use and perform really well in PvP. The Lingering Song was a high impact hand cannon with a very special trick. It can get its magazine size incredibly low with various combinations of magazine reducing perks like braced frame and small bore. Usually you'd want a big magazine on your hand cannon, right? Well, the Lingering Song could also roll luck in the chamber. So if you got your magazine down to say 4 bullets, you know that 1 out of those 4 is going to do bonus damage, leading to an easy 2-tap. This was definitely a very niche weapon, but it was a lot of fun to go for those 2-taps without even needing to get a kill first. Personally, I'm glad that we kept luck in the chamber back in Destiny 1 for now. It was a lot of fun at times, but I'm not a huge fan of randomness in PvP, so if this one comes back, I hope it's just a solid hand cannon instead of one relying on bullet RNG. Getting lucky with the Iron Banner loot table is enough RNG for me to handle. The Laughing Heart was one of the most stylish sniper rifles in Destiny history. Just look at this thing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this was an archetype that we actually don't have in Destiny 2. It was a 26 rate of fire stat, which I think would put it somewhere between the 90 RPM 1000 yard stare and the 140 RPM Praedyth's Revenge. Most importantly though, it had access to Snapshot, which is nearly an essential perk for PvP for a sniper to feel good. It also had access to Hidden Hand for extra aim assist or unflinching to cut down on the weapon flinch. I would love to give this thing a spin in Destiny 2. I'm just not sure if they'd want to create a whole new archetype for it or just modify it to fit what we currently have. The Distant Star was a 42 rate of fire scout rifle which matches the rate of fire of the Mida multi-tool. It had a great perk selection, making it useful for either PvE or PvP. In Destiny 1, we had many larger PvP maps which made scouts a lot more viable. Unfortunately, in Destiny 2 though, most of the ones offering longer lanes have been sunset, so scouts don't see a whole lot of play. The Mida multi-tool itself is still pretty solid with its movement buff and high aim assist, but I'm not really sure how good a legendary version would do without the same benefits. My guess is that we wouldn't see this one too much in PvP, but who knows, maybe we're up for a scout rifle meta again someday like vanilla Destiny 2. And of course, we can't forget about one of the strongest Iron Banner weapons of all time, the Clever Dragon. This was a max rate of fire pulse rifle that just shredded targets in PvP. I still remember being almost in shock at how good this pulse rifle was in the Crucible when I first got my hands on it. It brought back the feeling of pulse rifle dominance like the Hawkshaw era, except with even more lethality. In my eyes, the Clever Dragon is basically the measuring stick for how good a high rate of fire pulse rifle can be in PvP. It can get great range and stability rolls and great options for ease of use. It was just a 10 out of 10 pulse rifle all around. Like I mentioned with the Scori's Revenge earlier, these high rate of fire pulse rifles have been pretty strong in PvP lately, but not really meta defining by any means. I think if one of these pulses was to come back into the game and truly create a pulse rifle meta, it might be the Clever Dragon. In the history of Destiny, this was easily one of the strongest pulse rifles ever created, and I wonder if Bungie even thought it was a bit hot out of the gate. I would love to try this thing out again in Destiny 2, although I am a bit scared of the day it might come back into the Crucible. Of course, we've already had a number of old Trials favorites return from the first year of Trials of Osiris, like the Astral Horizon, Exile's Curse, Eye of Soul, the Messenger, the Scholar, and the Summoner. But one of the guns from the first ever Trials of Osiris has actually never made a return, the Jewel of Osiris. In Destiny 1, we didn't have the same rate of fire model in terms of an RPM stat, but instead it was just shown as a rate of fire stat. The Jewel had a rate of fire of 22, which at the time was the same as the current 140 RPM hand cannons. Probably the most unique thing was this was the first hand cannon in Destiny with access to Icarus, but as a perk, not as a mod. Back in Destiny 1, we didn't actually have mod slots yet, and if you wanted in-air accuracy on a hand cannon, Icarus was your best bet. It also had access to Third Eye, which kept your radar up while you're aiming down sights, just like the current Ace of Spades or the Mida multi-tool. Overall, it was a great hand cannon, but it did have some stiff competition from the exotics of the time like the Last Word, the Thorn, and the Hawkmoon. We also had the Infinite Theorem machine gun. It was the same archetype as the Thunderlord with a 66 rate of fire and 53 impact. Although it was a solid archetype, the main perks here were Third Eye and Spray and Play. Third Eye was useful no doubt to keep your radar up while you're aiming down sights, but Spray and Play was basically the same as the modern day Alloy magazine to buff the reload speed whenever the magazine was empty. And in current Destiny 2, having spare heavy ammo for PvP is a pretty rare occurrence, so that's not exactly helpful for us. One extra note to mention here was that the rolls for Year 1 Trials weapons were static rolls, but if you earned the Adept version of any of the primary weapons, you could get an elemental damage type instead of being simply kinetic. While this didn't have much of an implication for PvP, this was a huge deal for PvE, and it made some extremely desirable options for endgame PvE playlists like Nightfalls with elemental burns. This way you could have an elemental type for your primary, special, and heavy ammo slots for great PvE diversity. Okay, moving on to year 2 of Trials of Osiris, we had some really spicy weapons. I don't want to cover all of these since there were quite a few, but I'll touch on some of the highlights. While year 1 Trials weapons had static rolls, year 2 options came with random rolls just like most of the other weapons in Destiny 1. The Glass Promontory was a rapid fire sniper with a 37 rate of fire stat. This is most similar to something like the 140 RPM Praetor's Revenge sniper from the Vault of Glass raid. It really did have some nice perk options like Quick Draw, Snapshot, and Hidden Hand for some aim assist. It also had a very interesting perk called Perfectionist, where if you hit every shot as a precision kill, it would refill the magazine. Really cool, but of course this is pretty rare. These rapid fire snipers don't see a lot of play today because of the low body shot damage. Not too long ago, we were actually able to 2-tap to the body, which is extremely oppressive, but Bungie nerfed them to require 3 body shots for a kill, which drastically cut down on the representation in PvP. If you're a god tier aimer and you never miss a headshot, these can still be very effective, but for the most part, we see the 72 and 90 RPM snipers represented much more often in PvP. The Reflection Sum is a 66 rate of fire pulse, which I believe maps to the current 390 RPM pulses like the Bygones in Destiny 2. These pulses aren't all that hot right now unless you have a damage perk to 2 burst, and unfortunately I don't think that the Reflection Sum had any damage perks from what I could tell. It did have Army of One, which is sort of like a precursor to Wellspring, where non-assisted kills would recharge both your grenade and melee. With the recently nerfed ability cooldowns, maybe this would actually be kind of useful, who knows. Another popular pick was the Water Star. This was another 140 RPM hand cannon equivalent that actually had a crazy amount of possible roll combinations. Think of it like the spiritual predecessor to the 12 perk per slot monsters like the bottom dollar. I don't personally remember using this thing a whole lot, but it did have some cool options like reactive reload, which is the predecessor to kill clip, hidden hand for some extra aim assist, look in the chamber which randomly gave one bullet some bonus damage, and rangefinder to extend the range. I'd love to see another 140 RPM hand cannon return to the Trials loot pool, whether that's the Water Star, the Jewel of Osiris, or just something totally new. And of course, we can't talk about year 2 Trials of Osiris without mentioning the infamous Doctrine of Passing. This was one of the most meta-defining weapons ever to come out of Trials. It was a 900 RPM auto rifle, which actually doesn't even exist as an archetype currently in Destiny 2. Side note, I was kind of bummed to see the Vault of Glass return without the Atheon's epilogue because I thought they might actually bring back this bullet hose archetype, but maybe they felt it would overlap too heavily with submachine guns. For players who started in Destiny 2 and didn't get a taste of Destiny 1, can you imagine an Arctic Haze that fired at 900 RPM? Yeah, it was awesome. With the right roll and good aim, the Doctrine could absolutely delete an enemy in PvP. It was by far one of the most powerful Trials weapons on this list, and I really do hope to try it again in Destiny 2 someday. Perk-wise, most players would go for something like Persistence and Rodeo or Counterbalance to cut down on that gnarly recoil, which was a bit hard to tame without a good roll. Year 3 Trials of Osiris had some cool weapons as well. Here they returned to the format of static rolls, but adept versions of the primary weapons also came with Snapshot intrinsically, which is a really nice benefit. The Blind Perdition was a 73 rate of fire pulse rifle like the Outbreak Perfected. This archetype was much more favorable in Destiny 1 compared to most of the modern day 450 RPM pulses. If you recall, this was the same archetype as that of the Hawksaw, one of the most famous legendary pulses in Destiny history. The Blind Perdition could select a nice mix of range and stability, which of course is an amazing combination on a pulse rifle. It also had some ease of use perks like Counterbalance to keep the recoil vertical and hand loaded for some extra range. Today, these 450s aren't very popular outside of the brand new battle rifle, so I don't see this one getting a whole lot of use in the current sandbox unless the 450s get some love in a future update. The Vision Stone was an 88 rate of fire auto rifle, which I believe would be the equivalent to the modern day 720s like the Chroma Rush. These are actually pretty decent in the current Crucible sandbox, except they do tend to lack a bit of effective range and they aren't quite as forgiving as SMGs up close. The Vision Stone had Send It, which was a great range booster, and Rodeo to control the recoil. It also had Crowd Control, which was the Destiny 1 version of Rampage. I actually think this auto could do fairly well in modern day PvP, but it wouldn't likely be smashing the meta by any means. 720s are a lot of fun, but they're edged out a bit by a few more powerful weapon types. The Burning Eye was a 37 rate of fire scout rifle, which would be the equivalent to the modern day 180 RPM scouts like the Vision of Confluence. This scout had Third Eye like a few others on this list, which is particularly good on a scout rifle since you're likely going to be aiming down sights quite a bit. It also had explosive payload. We've seen just how powerful this can be on primary weapons recently with the rise of the explosive payload Fatebringer in PvP. It's a perk that improves damage drop-off, allows you to land some hits around corners, and maybe most importantly, it creates an insane amount of flinch on your enemy's screen. The 180 RPM scouts don't get a lot of play in the current sandbox thanks to their pretty awful 1-second time to kill. But even beyond the lackluster kill time, scouts just don't really enjoy many benefits with Destiny 2 map design. In Destiny 1, we had some maps that featured quite a lot of range, so scouts felt a little bit more useful. But Destiny 2 maps generally don't have as long of sightlines to benefit scout users, so I kinda doubt this one would make much of a splash if it returned to the game. And finally, we have one of my favorite snipers in the history of Destiny, the Winged Word. I absolutely loved this thing. It had a super unique scope, it looked awesome, and it had some fantastic perk options. In particular, you could select Snapshot, which all sniper mains know and love, and Unflinching, which is basically like an early version of No Distractions except without that aiming down sight timer requirement. If you were getting shot at, it was just straight up easier to return fire. This was no doubt a top sniper pick, occupying the 19 rate of fire archetype, which is the same as our modern day 90 RPM snipers. In other words, this would basically be a cousin to the Beloved. Out of any weapon on this list, I would take the Winged Word in a heartbeat. It was definitely one of my favorite weapons in the history of Trials. Raid weapons have been some of the most coveted loot in Destiny since the very beginning back in 2014. I got Max! These weapons are often some of the most powerful items in the game and can completely change how players approach playing Destiny. A few of these weapons are even so powerful that it's hard to make it into a group if you're missing out on an important one. Some of the most famous raid weapons from the original Vault of Glass have already made their way back into Destiny 2, but we're still missing a few of the epic ones. And as we see more old raids make their way back into Destiny 2, there's a pretty high chance that we'll see some of our favorite weapons making a big return. In this video, we're going to be taking a trip down memory lane and looking at some of the best gear that's ever dropped from the raids of Destiny. In Season of the Splicer, we received a remastered and revamped version of the Vault of Glass, the original raid that cemented Destiny as a new take on the classic MMO genre. This gave players a taste of the endgame experience that's rarely ever been seen in a shooter game. With the Vault of Glass making its way back into Destiny 2, we also got some of the fan favorite weapons back in our hands, including the OG god tier hand cannon Fatebringer as well as the raid exotic the Vex Mythoclast. Fatebringer, along with the other legendaries like the Found Verdict and Vision of Confluence, felt pretty true to form from Destiny 1. Vex Mythoclast on the other hand had its perk completely changed. It could now be transformed into a linear fusion rifle after just getting a few kills. But there were a few important guns from Destiny history that didn't make it back into the refreshed version of the raid. An auto rifle, the Atheon's Epilogue, a pulse rifle, the Praetor's Timepiece, and a fusion rifle, the Praetorian Foil. Atheon's Epilogue was a 900 RPM auto rifle, which is an archetype that actually doesn't exist right now in Destiny 2. The fastest we have in the current sandbox is 720 RPM. It also came with the perk Perfect Balance, which really helped to control the recoil with that wildly fast rate of fire. There was something so fun and special about this auto rifle. Watching an enemy's health pool steadily melt away was just a great feeling. Praetor's Timepiece was a high rate of fire pulse rifle. In the original Vault of Glass era, these really weren't a great choice, but later on this archetype of pulse rifle became the absolute meta when weapons like the Grasp of Moloch and the Clever Dragon showed up. This was also one of the most rare drops from the hard mode version of the Vault of Glass. The Praetorian Foil was also incredibly rare, but unlike the Timepiece, this thing was wildly powerful. Many players never saw this thing drop, and when I first got my hands on it, it instantly became my favorite fusion rifle in the game. It melted Guardians with its high impact damage in PvP, and it could take out an Oracle in the Atheon boss fight in just one charge. If you were lucky enough to get one, it probably never left your character's inventory. In late 2014, Bungie released Crota's End, the first Hive-themed raid set deep within the moon. This was a challenging day 1 raid almost exclusively because of the light level difference between the content and what was possible to be achieved by the players before beating the raid and getting that final drop from Crota. Nowadays, Crota's End is little more than a joke. The encounters were fairly easy and simplistic, and many of them were able to be cheesed in various ways. It got to the point where it became pretty common to solo the entire raid in less than half an hour. Most players don't want their raid experience to be this easy, and there's been some suggestions that maybe this raid could come back as a 3-player dungeon with some changes to the current mechanics. One way or another, I'm hoping to see this get remastered and brought back into Destiny 2 at some point, mostly so we can get one particular weapon back in our hands. We already have Whisper of the Worm, which was an exotic reissue of the legendary Black Hammer Sniper from Destiny 1. This legendary sniper was later converted into the exotic sniper called the Black Spindle. The original Black Hammer generated special ammo and reloaded the magazine just by landing 3 consecutive critical hits, and it became a near mandatory tool to clear endgame content because of the effectively infinite ammo. Eventually, it got nerfed to only consume ammo from your reserves instead of generating ammo, which still made it a solid DPS dealing sniper but not quite as good for cheesing content. When Whisper of the Worm was introduced into Destiny 2, it was initially just as crazy as the Black Hammer, and once again it generated its own ammo after you landed 3 consecutive crits. But time seemed to repeat itself, and now the Whisper only consumes ammo from reserves yet again, just like the nerfed version from Destiny 1. Regardless, Black Hammer will be remembered as one of the best PvE weapons in Destiny history along with the Yallarhorn from early Destiny 1. Crota's End though featured a rocket launcher of its own that actually rivaled the mighty Yallarhorn and became a good substitution if you wanted to use an exotic primary or a special weapon. The Hunger of Crota was a legendary rocket launcher. This was guaranteed to drop with intrinsic tracking and cluster bombs. It also had a 2-rocket magazine, which helped to cut down on the lengthy reload times that pained most of the other legendary rocket launchers. Crota's End featured a few other weapons that were decent choices because they dealt elemental damage, which was very rare on primary weapons, but otherwise they weren't all that special. The Word of Crota was a high rate of fire hand cannon that fired void bullets, which was very useful for breaking void shields. It also had an early version of the triple tap perk that we know today called Phantom Gift. Abyss Defiant was a solar auto rifle with the unique perk Lichbane, which disrupted those annoying hive wizards. Oversoul Edict was a high rate of fire pulse rifle similar to the Praetor's Timepiece, which was a pretty lackluster archetype in early Destiny, but it did feature the perk Darkbreaker, which could make bullets penetrate through those frustrating hive knight shields. But maybe the most interesting weapon to come from Crota's End was the one that I'd most want to try in Destiny 2, the Necrochasm. This was an exotic 900 RPM auto rifle that required you to earn a rare item, the Crux of Crota, to obtain it alongside a lengthy quest involving weaker versions of the final auto rifle. Necrochasm took all that explodey goodness from the Cursed Thralls and packaged it into an auto rifle. All you needed was to land a headshot kill and everything around the enemy would go boom. Unfortunately, it was never the most powerful primary or really anything close to it, but seeing those explosions work like a twist on the classic Firefly perk was just so cool, and the gun looked awesome. In September of 2015, Bungie released King's Fall as the raid to accompany the Taken King expansion, arguably the best expansion in Destiny history depending on who you ask. This was a major time of change in the Destiny ecosystem, with big improvements to core systems in the game, including the ability to infuse items to level them up, a deep rebalancing of weapons in PvP, 3 new subclasses, an excellent new campaign featuring a new destination on the Dreadnought, and to top it off, an epic raid that many Destiny fans will have towards the top of their favorites list. The final boss fight with Oryx is something that stuck with many players, and new raids are still being compared to the standard that the King's Fall raid set. It had great challenging encounters with a huge payoff at the end, which made for an experience that players aren't likely to forget quickly. It was certainly an improvement over Crota's End, and it proved that Bungie could make challenging raids with fun, engaging mechanics for the more hardcore players out there. Unfortunately, having well-designed encounters doesn't mean that the loot was also well received. Most of the King's Fall weapons were outclassed by loot from other sources, with a few exceptions. Quilum's Terminus, a legendary machine gun, was perhaps the most popular gun that could drop from the raid. It was a decent heavy choice throughout most of Destiny 1's lifecycle, including during the Age of Triumph. It had access to perks like Cocoon, which was an early version of auto-loading holster, and Life Leech, which gave health back after rapid kills. This provided usability that other machine guns didn't have, and the ability to roll Persistence and Extended Mag meant that you could go on a very long time before you had to reload. Many of the other King's Fall weapons didn't feel much better than the other non-raid loot available at the time. And to make things worse, the primary weapons from King's Fall lacked the elemental damage that made other primaries from the Vault of Glass and Crota's End so special. Outside of Year 1 Adept Trials loot and the Prison of Elders guns, there was no other way to earn primary weapons that had elemental damage types. So missing out on the elemental burn on the King's Fall weapons felt like a big hit to the relative power of the raid loot. Although much of the loot was definitely lackluster, I did love the sniper from the raid for PvP. Defiance of Yasmin had a really unique scope and tons of aim assist. It practically gave you free headshots, and it quickly became a favorite sniper among the Crucible enthusiasts. While the legendary weapons were not the most exciting loot compared to previous raids, there was one particular gun that will forever be infamous in Destiny for making the Oryx encounter much easier and dealing a ton of damage at the cost of your own health pool. Touch of Malice was a rapid-fire scout rifle that had the unique function of never running out of ammo. Instead, when the user got down to their last bullet, the gun would instead take a little bit of health and then refill the magazine with a single high damage bullet. This would repeat until the player reloaded or they died from pushing the perk a bit too far. In PvP, this was a big trade-off, and the danger of low health usually wasn't worth that extra damage. But in PvE, and especially during the Oryx fight at the end of King's Fall, a Titan bubble could provide an overshield and negate most of the danger from eating away at your own health pool. Players would simply dip in and out of the bubble to refresh their shield while dishing out incredible DPS for a primary weapon. You might say that we've saved the best loot for last. In September of 2016, Bungie released the Wrath of the Machine raid to accompany the Rise of Iron expansion. I'll go ahead and say it, the mechanics in the Wrath of the Machine raid are unparalleled to any other raid in Destiny 1, including King's Fall. This is my favorite of the Destiny 1 raids, save maybe for the Vault of Glass, and that one really benefits from a huge dose of nostalgia since it was the first ever raid. The atmosphere of Wrath is just fantastic, and the encounters that take place are equally unique and enjoyable. In particular, the entry into the dark rooms leading into the final boss fight is a gaming experience that I'll probably never forget. Alongside the ambiance of the raid, the loot you could receive from completing the encounters was some of the best in the game. This raid provided some of my favorite weapons in the series. The weapons that could drop from this raid are interesting for a few different reasons. They came equipped with some really unique and powerful perk combinations, and they made up for some of the more underrepresented archetypes of the time. For starters, we have the Ex Machina sniper rifle. This was a high impact sniper which wasn't particularly common at the time. It came with a top tier perk combination of spray and pray and wait for it. This made it an instantly popular pick for PvE. The combination had some great synergy as it played off of emptying the magazine. Spray and pray would increase the reload speed of the weapon when the magazine was completely empty, and wait for it would increase the magazine size after finishing that empty reload. Combined, this would mean that you could put out a lot of damage really fast. This sniper was outclassed by a few other picks for PvP, but it was considered a best in slot option for most of Year 3 in PvE. The If Materia machine gun and Chaos Dogma scout rifle both featured a synergistic perk combination that made them instant fan favorites as well. Both of these guns came with the perk Triple Double, which had a unique ability to buff another perk, Triple Tap. Triple Double made it so that Triple Tap would return 2 bullets from reserves to the magazine after hitting 3 headshots in a row. Theoretically, that meant that you could go on a very long time without reloading, which essentially mitigated the slow reload time on the weapons. This propelled both of these weapons from being just decent legendary raid weapons to the forefront of players' inventories. Interestingly enough, we saw a return to this form in the Witch Queen expansion with the introduction of enhanced perks. When crafting a weapon, players had the option to choose an enhanced perk if their weapon was leveled high enough. If you go with enhanced triple tap, you get 2 bullets back into the magazine instead of the usual 1. Alongside these S tier legendary options, the raid also featured a lengthy exotic quest to get the Pulse Outbreak Prime. This was the predecessor of the gun Destiny 2 players know today, Outbreak Perfected. Outbreak was only obtainable by completing an infamously long quest that took you into the secret parts of the raid accessed by completing a puzzle and then eventually testing your knowledge of the binary number system. If you haven't seen the quest needed to earn this gun, it's worth breaking out some popcorn and watching an old data video just to understand the complexity of what Bungie set the player base onto. Aside from the amazing aesthetic, Outbreak was a very powerful weapon in both PvP and PvE. It generated Siva nanite bugs by landing precision hits or kills that would go attack enemies. The visuals of this effect were awesome and it really helped to take down big groups of enemies. Outbreak would return in Destiny 2 during the season of the Drifter during the 0-hour secret mission. Unfortunately, this mission is now sunset with the launch of Beyond Light, but hopefully we'll see it return before too long. The gun was pretty much unchanged during its transition into the Destiny 2 form, and it still remains a go-to option in both PvE and PvP, even being used as a popular DPS option in a few raids. Destiny 2 has some amazing exotic weapons. I mean, the Deathbringer is maybe my favorite exotic of all time. But many of the fan favorite exotic weapons from Destiny 1 still haven't made their way back into Destiny 2, so I wanted to deep dive into a few of my personal favorites and see how they could potentially be brought back. The first curse was a 120 RPM hand cannon from Destiny 1 made by Tex Mechanica. This is the same foundry that created The Last Word. This thing is just beautiful in every way, and it would have been a really popular choice during the 120 RPM hand cannon meta that we had several months ago. The main perk automatically reloaded your magazine after your first precision kill and then also gave you a bonus to range and stability until your next reload. It also gave a nice bonus to usability while you're aiming down sights, which is kind of like an opposite to The Last Word, which gets a bonus from hip firing. I really believe this gun would slot perfectly into the current sandbox without needing too many major changes. And it would also be a great addition because we currently only have one exotic hand cannon in the 120 RPM archetype, which is the Stern. Next up is a rifle that was coveted by every sniper main in early Destiny 1. You might say that it required a bit of patience to get it to finally drop. Patience and Time was a sniper rifle with a unique perk that made the user go invisible after aiming down sights. You might be thinking, well, no big deal. Every invisible hunter spammer who's using the Omni Oculus 24/7 is already invisible while they're sniping. And I'd have to agree with you. After dealing with the fallout of Void 3.0 invisible hunters everywhere, I think I'd want Bungie to reimagine the main perk of this old sniper. But what I'd want to see come back exactly the same as it was in Destiny 1 is the incredible sound that it made when it fired. Seriously, this is my favorite sounding sniper in all of Destiny history, and sometimes I would use it even though I didn't love the high zoom just because I wanted to hear that sweet sound when landing headshots. I think the Invis perk could be swapped for an exotic version of No Distractions, and it could retain the third eye from Destiny 1 so you can keep your radar up while you're aiming down sights. Maybe they could also give it the old Perfectionist perk from the Still Piercer in Destiny 1 where landing all of your precision kills would instantly reload the magazine. Early Destiny 1 players will remember this predecessor to the Telesto as the most buggy gun in the game. Pocket Infinity was a fusion rifle that charged up a full typical fusion blast and then proceeded to empty the rest of the magazine in auto fire mode in just a matter of seconds. When it worked well, it was just insane in the Crucible. I was one of the lucky Guardians who got the Pocket Infinity bounty early in my Destiny career, and I still remember melting Guardians in the first ever Iron Banner events who had just no chance against it. I'm honestly not sure how this one could come back because part of its charm was basically reincarnated with how the Merciless works in Destiny 2. And Pocket Infinity was so buggy that I think Bungie's probably happy to just retire this one permanently. In Destiny 1, almost every sniper rifle required special ammo or heavy ammo to fire, but one rifle that resembled an elephant gun broke that rule. No Land Beyond was a sniper that occupied the primary ammo slot and therefore only required primary ammo to fire. The catch was that it cycled bullets incredibly slow. It was so slow that players even developed a sprint canceling method to speed up the animations between firing off rounds. No Land was mostly seen as a weapon just to be used for fun in early Destiny 1, but later on when special ammo was reduced in PvP, it actually became a fairly popular pick in Trials of Osiris, especially when paired with a sidearm to cover the closer angles. In Destiny 2, we have many snipers in both the kinetic and energy slots, so that novelty is definitely worn off, and we also have bows now that consume primary ammo and almost act like sniper rifles, but without the ability to typically one-hit kill. I'd love to see No Land come back in some format, but I'm not sure if a primary ammo sniper makes sense in the game anymore. After all, we've already seen the issues that Revoker created with nearly unlimited special ammo in Trials. Hopefully Bungie could come up with some cool way to bring this back though, because it's definitely one of my favorite looking snipers in Destiny history. Speaking of special weapons in the primary slot, Destiny 1 also featured a shotgun called the Universal Remote. Just like No Land, the main gimmick here was that you could run this primary ammo shotgun alongside another special weapon and have the classic Halo setup of Shoddy Sniper. These days, having a shotgun in either slot is really nothing special, but Universal Remote had such a cool aesthetic, I'd love to see Bungie bring it back in some capacity. The scope on the Universal Remote was such a unique feature on a shotgun. I could see it potentially having some effect like duality where maybe it gets substantially improved performance from aiming down sights. One of my favorite fusions in Destiny 1 had a perk that was ripped off to be used by many legendary weapons in Destiny 2. Plan C had a similar function to the modern backup plan perk that we have today. Except unlike the nerf version of backup plan that we have now that reduces your damage, the original Plan C dealt full damage in just fractions of a second. This was an amazing perk because you could run around with your primary weapon out and then quickly swap to the Plan C and melt any enemy in an instant without the typical charge up time required by other fusion rifles. I think Plan C could come back with this unnerfed version of backup plan and be a potent contender in the modern Crucible. Without a doubt, it was an awesome looking fusion and your enemies definitely don't want to get anywhere near those spikes. One of the most interesting exotic scout rifles from Destiny 1 actually used to be a Warlock exclusive weapon. Tlaloc performed like a typical scout rifle until you had your super fully charged. At this point, the gun would gain a massive boost to usability and rate of fire until you spent that super. I think this could be a really interesting option in Destiny 2 with many of the supers that aren't so great. Even after the changes with Void 3.0, I think I would happily sit on a tether with my hunter if it meant that my primary weapon could out-TTK anything else from that range. The Aegis Scepter Catalyst gives a similar trade-off opportunity in Destiny 2, and I would love to see them make more weapons to give an alternate use for that super bar. Dragon's Breath was a rocket launcher from Destiny 1 that literally set your enemies on fire. I'm honestly kinda surprised we didn't see this one added back to the game with the recent Solar 3.0 update. To me, it would have fit right into the game with all the other solar burning abilities in the new Scorch system. This is an awesome looking heavy weapon that could dish out some serious boss damage in Destiny 1, and I'd love to see it added to Destiny 2 to give us more options in the heavy weapon department. The weapon most known for cheesing basically any encounter back in Destiny 1 was the Icebreaker. If you could find any small safe space in a boss fight during Destiny 1, it was a pretty sure thing that you'd be blinking away at the boss's health with the Icebreaker. This was because it was one of only 2 weapons that automatically regenerated its own ammo. This made the Icebreaker not only a staple for endgame PvE activities, but it also became a big problem in Trials of Osiris later when Bungie took away our special ammo. We've recently seen the same trends in Destiny 2 where special ammo is becoming more scarce, and I don't think Bungie's likely to introduce another weapon that provides special ammo generation for free. We definitely don't need another Revoker situation. A big part of me thinks the Icebreaker should just stay put in Destiny 1 and be remembered as the gun that was so good it could cheese basically any encounter, but if they did want to bring it over to Destiny 2, I think there's a good opportunity to reimagine how it works to be more true to its name. With the stasis element being added to Destiny, it would be really cool to see the sniper turn into an actual Icebreaker, where it could deal bonus damage to targets who are frozen by stasis. This would make for some really interesting team play setups in PvE and hopefully not break PvP like it did in Destiny 1. The other famous weapon that generated its own special ammo in Destiny 1 was Invective. Instead of generating one bullet at a time like the Icebreaker, Invective would generate an entire magazine all at once. I always loved the look of the shotgun, and although it wasn't the best PvP option compared to some of the sniper rifles out there like the Felwinter's Lie, I always thought it was really fun to use. I'd love to see this gun be brought forward into Destiny 2, but with a reworked exotic perk that didn't generate ammo. I was thinking perhaps they could do something similar to my Icebreaker idea of being effective against stasis, where Invective could have some interaction with the next elemental type that Bungie introduces to Destiny. Starting off in the very beginning, we have the original lane peeker, the Mida multi-tool. In early Destiny 2, primary weapons killed much more slowly than they do today, and the team play meta basically came down to strictly holding hands next to your buddy. This way you could safely team shot your opponents down one scout rifle bullet at a time from safety. Mida was a top pick in this era because of its ease of use and amazing strafing speed thanks to the bonus mobility. It also paired nicely with the Mida mini tool if you were into SMGs. Today, the Mida is actually one of the best scout rifles once again, although most maps don't really have enough range to let you exploit playing from those further distances. Better Devils was considered the best hand cannon in early Destiny 2 by most players, perhaps only contested by the Sunshot and the Old Fashioned. Back in the days of static rolls, this hand cannon came with the perk Explosive Payload, which extended its effective range and created more flinch on your opponent's screen when they got hit. In vanilla Destiny 2, primary weapons did much less damage compared to today, leading to some lengthy duels. Any abilities like Explosive Payload that let you get a shot ahead in the duel could easily help you win these gunfights. While Better Devils is now sunset, the power of Explosive Payload still lives on in hand cannons like the Fatebringer. In year 1 of Destiny PvP, special ammo actually didn't exist yet. You had a primary weapon in your kinetic and energy slots, and the special weapons of today were actually relegated to the power ammo slot. For this reason, many players would pair their scout rifle or hand cannon with an auto rifle in the energy slot. Uriel's Gift became the go-to pick for a majority of PvP players, especially those on console. This pairing led to a nice coverage of the mid to long range, but it did open you up to some trouble for those very close quarters fights. Today, 450 RPM auto rifles aren't considered very good options, and you should probably avoid them. The Antiope? Antiope? However you want to pronounce it, it was without a doubt the most popular SMG of early Destiny 2. With a high zoom sight and kill clip, you could absolutely shred Guardians if you could control it. The only catch was that this weapon was fairly hard to obtain, so many dedicated players took quite a while to get their hands on one if they ever even did. The Antiope remained a pretty popular pick throughout the first year of Destiny 2, even being paired with one of the top pulse rifle options coming up soon on our list. These days, the legacy of the Antiope lives on, but in the form of the 600 RPM Trials SMG, the Shayera's Wrath. The Dire Promise was a reward from the old Faction Rally event for Dead Orbit loyalists. Initially, it seemed like more of a PvE option since it rolled with triple tap, but PvP players quickly realized that the combination of high aim assist, a lightweight frame, and 150 RPM created an extremely deadly hand cannon in the Crucible. Dire became a go-to option for many top PvP players, especially those on PC. When compared with competitors like the Midnight Coup, it felt smoother with noticeably less recoil, which made landing those 4 hits very easy. Upon its reintroduction with random rolls in Season of the Worthy, Dire reclaimed its position around the top of the meta. However, it was also one of the casualties of Beyond Light when 150s were transformed into 140s and it lost its lightweight frame bonus as well. Today, it's still a great hand cannon, but not quite as popular as it was compared to its glory days. Veteran players out there will remember a very special weekend in Destiny 2 history when the Crucible turned into a giant game of laser tag. Some players might even have a special emblem to commemorate their participation. Prometheus Lens absolutely rocked the Crucible when it was first introduced, incinerating Guardians in a fraction of a second. Although this weekend of laser tag only lasted a short while, it will forever be remembered in Destiny 2 history. These days, the Prometheus is actually a pretty strong option once again, especially with the introduction of Trace Rifle's scavenger mods. In the Warmind expansion, Bungie greatly changed the pace of Destiny 2 in many ways. The Graviton Lance was changed from firing a 3-round burst like most other pulse rifles to only firing a 2-round burst, while keeping the massive final bullet featuring extra damage and no damage drop-off. Kills with this weapon would also cause the target to explode into mini Nova Bombs that would track nearby enemies. After the buff, Graviton quickly became a top meta option for PvP, especially when paired with the Antiope D to cover essentially all engagement ranges. If you played a session of competitive PvP back in Season 3, it wasn't uncommon to face a whole team of Graviton Lance users. Today, the Graviton has felt a little bit forgotten. The time to kill is still unchanged from year 1, while many other pulse rifles have power crept right by it. The other exotic pulse rifle challenging for the top of the meta during Warmind PvP was the Vigilance Wing. This beast of a pulse rifle fires a 5-round burst that absolutely shreds an enemy if you can land your shots. Vigilance Wing featured a fast time to kill, decent range, and the onslaught of bullets that heavily flinched your opponents in a duel. Perhaps the only significant downside was the lack of a clean sight aesthetic, since the ornament Vigil of Saint 14 hadn't yet been introduced. Just like the Graviton, it was also commonly paired with a particular SMG, more on that one coming soon. In today's meta, the Vigilance Wing is still an incredibly strong weapon featuring a fast time to kill with tons of forgiveness in the headshot department. Following the pulse rifle trend, we have sort of a pulse rifle hand cannon hybrid in Crimson. This odd hand cannon fires a 3-round burst and was certainly more popular with controller players than those on mouse and keyboard because of the way that the gun model blocks your view while you're shooting. Crimson's health granted on a kill, ability to auto-reload after a headshot kill, and insane flinch output made it a very popular choice. Today, it's pretty much the same story. It's very popular for controller players, especially on console, but not quite as popular with the mouse and keyboard crew. In Warmind, there was one particular SMG that rose to prominence, the Ikelos SMG. This thing was a common pairing with the Vigilance Wing to cover both the close and medium ranges effectively. You have to remember that this was back when shotguns were still in the heavy ammo slot instead of requiring special ammo, and melees required 3 hits for a kill instead of 2, so SMGs were a very popular pick to cover those close quarter battles. The Ikelos SMG was easy to use and also paired well with the Dire Promise for players who preferred to use a hand cannon over a pulse rifle. In today's meta, the Ikelos is still a pretty decent pick, but it's been overshadowed by great SMGs like the Shayera's Wrath and the Multimach. In Season 3, Bungie released the first ever pinnacle weapon locked behind the competitive playlist, the Redrix Claymore. Newer players may only know of the Redrix Broadsword, which was the easier to obtain yet better version of the Claymore released in Season 4. The Claymore was a true trophy weapon. Season 3 competitive PvP was a bloodbath, with lost streaks, win streaks that got reset every time you got to 5, and overall many less points being awarded. Players able to reach 2100 glory for the Fabled ranked earned the coveted Redrix Claymore, a weapon owned by less than 1% of the population according to Light.gg. The Claymore featured a brand new perk called Desperado, which allowed you to shoot bullets nearly twice as fast after getting a headshot kill and reloading. It's led to some amazing PvP clips over the years. Today, the Claymore and Broadsword are both sunset, but Desperado lives on in the Messenger Pulse Rifle, which is still dominating PvP lobbies. The Forsaken expansion completely shook up the entire PvP landscape. Special ammo was now a thing, new exotics were added that we could tinker with, random rolls on our weapons got reintroduced, and the lore got expanded. One of the saddest moments in Destiny history was when we saw our beloved Hunter Vanguard, Cayde 6, meet with his demise at the hands of Uldren Sov. For lore enthusiasts, this was a very tragic moment, but on the other hand, PvP players rejoiced as they had finally gotten access to Cayde's signature hand cannon, the Ace of Spades, which hadn't been seen since Destiny 1. It had amazing stats, best in class range, basically every perk that you could ever imagine, and it also came with Memento Mori, a perk which loaded some high damage bullets after a kill and a reload. This was extremely powerful, as one single kill would enable you to kill your opponents in just 1 headshot and 2 body shots, or sometimes even just 2 headshots. Understandably, Ace got nerfed multiple times, but even still it almost always remained towards the top of the meta. Today, it lives on as arguably the best hand cannon in the entire game. Forsaken opened the floodgates for special weapons in the Crucible with a reworked ammo economy. Now, instead of requiring heavy ammo, every player could run around the map with shotguns, snipers, and fusion rifles full of ammo that they spawned in with after every death. Perhaps the most popular shotgun in early Forsaken was the Dust Rock Blues. This precision frame shotgun had some incredible range, and because it sat in the kinetic slot, it was a great pairing for the next weapon duo up on our list. Dust Rock could also roll with full auto, which at the time provided an insane increase to the shots per minute. A god roll on the Dust Rock was a terrifying thing to come across in PvP, especially since this was before a long series of shotgun nerfs. Today, the Dust Rock is sunset, but its spirit lives on in the brand new Fractithist, which is an amazing shotgun. During Forsaken, Bungie added 2 very special hand cannons to the competitive loot pool, Luna's Howl and Not Forgotten. Luna's had more stability but less range, and was available to players who completed the quest and reached 2100 glory. Not Forgotten was the true trophy weapon of Season 4, requiring you to first obtain the Luna's Howl and then climb all the way up to Legend rank at 5450. Where Luna featured more stability, Not Forgotten traded that in for more range, and a lot of it. It became the highest skill reward weapon in Destiny 2's PvP. These hand cannons were special because, like the Claymore from Season 3, they also brought a unique perk, Magnificent Howl. Landing 2 headshots in a row would hugely beef up the damage of the next bullet, allowing you to land just a body shot to kill the target. If you played your cards right with the perk, you could even 2-tap an enemy at 180 RPM for a blistering fast time to kill. This duo has been nerfed a few times, losing the potency of Magnificent Howl as well as being changed from a 180 into a 140. They are still usable today, and Not Forgotten is actually pretty good, but nothing compared to its glory days. With Ace of Spades being in contention with Luna's and Not Forgotten as the best hand cannon, players needed a great energy slot shotgun to pair with our favorite exotic from Kate 6. And the boss from the Hallowed Lair Nightfall had the perfect solution, the Mindbender's Ambition. This shotgun featured an aggressive frame, meaning that it dealt the highest damage per bullet and it also fired faster after landing a kill. With amazing roll potential featuring the OG version of Quick Draw, Mindbenders became the go-to shotgun for PvP enthusiasts. Many friends of mine developed some absolute degenerate level gaming chairs while grinding out kills with their god roll. Today, Mindbenders is sunset, but it remains the only aggressive frame shotgun to still have quick draw, and it's an amazing performing shotgun in PvP, assuming you don't need to be at maximum power level. Forsaken also ushered in a new era of pulse rifle enthusiasts. There are actually quite a few great ones that I'll combine here for a single entry in our list. Namely, we're looking at the Bygones, Go Figure, and the Blast Furnace, which came to us a little bit later in Black Armory. Each of these pulses could deal some serious damage from the back of the map pretty safely with a very forgiving time to kill. For this reason, they were deemed dad rifles by many people in the PvP community, which is a meme that has really stuck around into the modern days. All three of these pulse rifles could land some amazing rolls and were quite a force on the battlefield. Although they are each sunset today, there's still great choices in quick play, especially with a god roll. Later on during the Forsaken era, one of the most iconic weapons in the history of Destiny made a big return, the Last Word. This cowboy hip-firing hand cannon could straight up delete an enemy in only 3 bullets while firing in a blistering fast 225 RPM. It was a naturally great pairing with a sniper rifle in particular, since a sniper could manage the longer lanes and the Last Word was great at annihilating enemies up close. Initially, it was considered overpowered on mouse and keyboard and a bit underwhelming on controller because controller players felt the recoil was a little bit too hard to control. Over time, this would flip with a rework of how the gun functioned, aiming to double down on its hipfire design. Today, the Last Word is still considered a top choice on controller, but substantially harder to use for mouse and keyboard players, a point of contention in the community. If ridiculously lethal hand cannons weren't your thing, Bungie introduced a pinnacle grenade launcher that would shake the PvP community for a long time, the Mountaintop. Unlike most other breech-loaded grenade launchers, this one fired its projectile so fast that it was nearly instantaneous for the payload to reach the target. This created a playstyle where Guardians would jump up high in the air with their Mountaintop to dish out some huge chunk damage to enemies below, and then they'd swap to their primary weapon to clean up the kill with just a couple of easy hits. This would become a huge problem in the community, especially with the next weapon on our list. Mountaintop did finally get a huge nerf, and it isn't seen too often today, especially being sunset, but its legacy will never be forgotten by veteran players. Imagine a weapon that could clean up a sniper rifle body shot or a blast from the Mountaintop, and then go on to absolutely destroy the entire rest of the enemy team. Sounds a little bit like the Recluse. This SMG was the pinnacle reward of Season of the Drifter, and it was also the perfect pairing for the Mountaintop. This combo obliterated PvP lobbies for months and basically became the most complained about loadout in all of Destiny's Crucible. However, the Recluse didn't rely on Mountaintop to be good. It was actually a great pairing with basically any other weapon, and once you got a kill with any of your weapons, the bonus damage from the Recluse would kill your next enemy faster than you could blink an eye. Over time, it received a big justified nerf, but it's still a pretty decent SMG today if you can hit your shots, although options like the Multi-Mach have mostly taken its place. For basically the entirety of Destiny's lifespan, hand cannons have been the #1 weapon archetype in the meta. Players have always sought out better and more effective hand cannons to slot into their builds. Spare Rations got introduced in the Season of the Drifter, and it immediately got the entire community grinding for it. It was a lightweight 150 RPM hand cannon with some of the best perks and stats ever seen on this archetype. Unfortunately, it was also locked behind the abysmally low drop rates in a very tedious and unengaging activity, the Reckoning. Some players managed to dodge the RNG madness and settled for the curated role featuring explosive payload. In this case, the benefits of explosive payload were enough to offset the lack of the effective range. Although it's sunset now and it lost some of its rate of fire, Spare Rations is still an amazing hand cannon for quick play modes. Sometimes the introduction of a catalyst or a rework of a weapon has unintended consequences. This is definitely the case with the Lord of Wolves. Originally, this pulse rifle shotgun hybrid fired 5 shots per burst, and then it ramped up to 10 after a kill. It had significantly more range than the regular shotgun, but it required more bullets to get the kill. This meant that you had to be pretty accurate with your aim to get the initial kill. Bungie changed this though to where you could activate Release the Wolves on demand and reap the benefits of the extra damage. This instantly made Lord of Wolves busted. Suddenly, this weapon could delete a super at SMG ranges with the click of a button and an almost trivial aim requirement. Understandably, the alternate mode got nerfed, and the availability of special ammo has also gotten reduced, so this has made the Lord of Wolves much harder to use in today's meta, but it's still actually a pretty good option. Sometimes I question if Bungie actually understands their own weapon meta. Apparently snipers weren't oppressive enough in literally all of Destiny's lifespan, so they needed a new entry in their ranks which would make sniping even easier. What's the #1 problem of sniping? Well, if you miss, you lose one shot of special ammo. Revoker, on the other hand, fixed this issue with its pinnacle perk, Reversal of Fortune. It would generate ammo out of thin air whenever you missed. This sniper rifle was a huge problem in the Crucible. It was extremely forgiving, easy to use, and missed shots came with almost no risk whatsoever. Later in the early days of Trials of Osiris, players would camp the furthest corner of the map until one sniper shot finally connected. I'm really glad to see this one sunset. It single-handedly ruined the Destiny ammo economy, but you're still going to see it from time to time if you play the Survival playlist. In the Season of Opulence, players got access to the Austringer, a kinetic 140 RPM hand cannon with some of the craziest stats ever seen on this archetype. With Rangefinder, the Austringer could challenge even the effective range of Ace of Spades, which had been a top contender in the range department ever since Forsaken. Unfortunately, the Austringer was also competing against the faster shooting 150 RPM hand cannons like the Spare Rations, which gave it a bit of a hard time to compete in the meta. Nonetheless, many players enjoyed the sleek model and the high stats, and it was personally one of my favorite hand cannons. I was very sad when Sunsetting took this one away from us because I felt like it could have been one of the best hand cannons in the game after all the changes. Of course, no hand cannon is complete without an amazing sniper rifle to pair with it. And in the Season of Opulence, Bungie gave us arguably the most popular sniper in the history of Destiny 2, the Beloved. This sniper was absolutely oozing with aim assist, fired at 90 RPM, which was the preferred archetype of the time, and it could roll with amazing perks like Snapshot and Quick Draw together. Beloved's time in the sun was also during the era just before sniper rifles got their aim assist nerfed based on their zoom stat. So the low 40 zoom scope on Beloved allowed you to land some easy headshots whether you're at point blank or across the map. It's my favorite sniper of all time in Destiny and one that I dearly miss, but I do understand why they wanted to change it. It still does feel amazing in quick play even after the nerf. There's basically never been a time in Destiny's history where sniper rifles weren't a top pick in the weapon meta, and this gun is no exception. Don't be fooled by the fusion-like appearance though. Arantil definitely was a sniper rifle back in its prime. Before the nerf, fusion rifles had a very high damage floor, meaning that something like Arantil could theoretically pick up a kill at nearly infinite range. Of course, it was pretty difficult to manage the recoil from so far away, but every once in a while you could absolutely snipe an enemy from downtown. Obviously, this warranted a nerf, and today it's the precision frames that are actually the better ones for long-range kills, but Arantil was a really fun weapon back in its day. At the beginning of Season of the Worthy, 600 RPM auto rifles got buffed, while Hardlight itself got another specific buff. Hardlight's range was theoretically infinite, and bullets got a massive damage increase after reflecting off of walls. Players quickly found out that holding left click down a lane was an efficient option to deal chip damage to basically everyone close by. This was a big problem. Hardlight eventually got rightfully nerfed, and today it's basically just a decent auto rifle. Season of the Worthy brought us a returning weapon from Destiny 1 which became a staple of the Crucible for quite a long time. I'm talking about the Fellwinter's Lie, the unique aggressive frame pellet shotgun with the intrinsic perk called Shot Package that made pellet spread more consistent. With absolutely crazy perks available like Quick Draw and Opening Shot, players could already envision Fellwinter's as a perfect shotgun. It instantly became a top pick for PvP players, except there was a problem. Fellwinter's Lie became completely unobtainable in the next season, Season of Arrivals. Once again, FOMO, fear of missing out, spread across the community. This was yet another harsh reminder that Bungie rarely lets you skip a season without missing some amazing loot. Eventually, Fellwinter's became available to everyone again, and the shotgun apes rejoiced. But soon, Bungie decided that aggressive frame shotguns with Quick Draw were too powerful, so they changed the perk to Surplus and then later also nerfed the range. It's never had quite the same feel ever since the changes, but it's still a pretty good shotgun. In Season of the Worthy, Bungie wanted to shake up the meta once again and they massively buffed the 600 RPM auto rifles. Unfortunately, one of the strongest auto rifles was locked behind a giant wall of RNG. Just like Spare Rations, the Nong Hunger was a weapon that came from the Reckoning. People didn't quite pick up on the strength of kill clip on this auto until the next season, Season of Arrivals, when it became readily available to be focused from the Umbral engram system. With the right role, it could easily dominate quick play lobbies due to its lethality and forgiving nature. While it might not have been the strongest choice for pure dueling, many players enjoyed the leniency that came from the high rate of fire. Understandably, 600 RPM auto rifles did get nerfed, but they still are decent choices in the Crucible as of today. When questioned why they played Destiny 2, most players would answer for the gunplay, of course. Our next weapon though joined the party in Beyond Light, and it might be hard to find in your collections. Based on how many gunplay lovers made this option back when it first came out, it's hard to not call it a weapon. Turning yourself into an actual piece of artillery just to get easy team wipes was such a dominant tactic that it basically invalidated every other hunter subclass. If you agree that this still needs a nerf today, let Bungie know by shatter diving that like button and also subscribing to the channel. In Beyond Light, Bungie wanted to shake up the hand cannon meta by removing the 150 RPM lightweight archetype and converting the 110s into 120s while also giving them a massive range boost. Players quickly picked up on the fact that they were massively overbuffed, allowing for some huge chunk damage at crazy ranges. With any kind of damage boost, 120 RPM hand cannons could kill in just 2 headshots, allowing for skilled players to go on massive kill sprees. Unfortunately for the majority of the community though, one of the best 120 RPM hand cannons was completely unobtainable, the True Prophecy. Your only alternatives were the Steady Hand, which was very difficult to get a good roll on as it only dropped from the Iron Banner, or Criminal's Dagger if you happen to have one from an old Iron Banner. This once again caused a lot of FOMO in the community. Sturm was also a popular choice as an exotic, but the legendary 120s were much tougher to acquire. Over the next couple of seasons, 120s got nerfed multiple times, but they still remain a valid choice even in today's meta. After a season of FOMO for True Prophecy, Bungie decided to introduce a new king of 120 RPM hand cannons. Many players were hopeful that they could finally attain a spicy roll on a 120, though those hopes may have been cut short because this hand cannon was gated behind a massive wall of cheaters, lag switchers, and degenerate strategies in the Trials of Osiris. I was fortunate enough to get my hands on a god roll of the Adept version pretty quickly, and I immediately fell in love with it. With Rampage you could 2-tap enemies, and it was just a clean feeling 120 with massive range and enough stability that it almost felt like a 140. With the nerfs to 120 hand cannons, Igneous has fallen slightly out of fashion, but it's still a nasty hand cannon able to perform well in basically any type of PvP. I also want to make a shout out here to the bottom dollar, which is a very popular pick especially for those who didn't have a good roll on the Igneous. The Redress Claymore was the original high-impact pulse rifle featuring Desperado as its pinnacle perk. In the Season of the Chosen though, Bungie thought it would be a great idea to put Desperado on a randomly rolled Trials weapon. So they reintroduced the Messenger from Destiny 1 as a legendary high-impact pulse rifle able to roll with Desperado along with a randomly rolled third column perk. It wasn't a big surprise that the Messenger instantly became the best legendary pulse rifle in the game. While hand cannons may still be easier to use, some players are willing to put in the effort required to master the Messenger and become a scary opponent on the field. Even today, it's one of the highest skill, highest reward weapons in the entire game. In Season of the Chosen, Bungie thought it was about time to give us another famous hand cannon returning from Destiny 1, the Palindrome. This 140 RPM beauty has some of the best base stats in the game and can roll with Rangefinder to push out the damage falloff to the extreme. It's one of the best feeling, best looking, and easiest to use hand cannons in the game. For a while, having a primary weapon in the energy slot was considered undesirable, but these days we have so many options like the Chaperone and the Eye of Soul to pair with the Palindrome that concern is really no longer a big deal. If you want a smooth shooting, incredible hand cannon, look no further than the Palindrome. Imagine taking the last word, stretching it out a little bit, sprinkling some crazy range on top of it, and seasoning it with a hefty amount of aim assist. What you get is a feisty hand cannon sniper rifle hybrid, which has single-handedly revived scout rifles in PvP, the Dead Man's Tale. This is a 120 RPM lever action scout rifle that can hip fire with almost perfect accuracy at 150 RPM thanks to the catalyst. Suddenly, players had to deal with the lethality of a 0.8 second time to kill scout rifle from basically anywhere on the map. The hipfire nature of Dead Man's Tale also allowed for faster strafe speed and more awareness during your duels. This new king of scout rifles became especially dominant on mouse and keyboard and was a popular pick to pair with a grenade launcher like a modern day version of the Recluse mountaintop setup. Although it's been recently nerfed, many top players still consider it to be perhaps the strongest primary weapon in the entire game. The Multi-Mach was actually an Iron Banner SMG all the way back from year 1. With the introduction of random rolls in Forsaken, This one never really got its time to shine until pretty recently. Only a few select players gave the original multi-mach much of a try. In hindsight though, it might have actually been pretty oppressive all the way along. This is especially true for Titan mains with the Peacekeeper exotic boots that could terrorize lobbies with a seemingly bad weapon. The multi-mach was reintroduced in Season of the Chosen with random rolls. While the harsh nature of RNG may have created even more rage in the community, one thing was for sure. With Iron Reach, Killing Wind, and the Model 8 sight, the multi-mach can get some absolutely crazy range. It also occupies the 900 RPM lightweight frame, which has an extremely fast time to kill while also buffing your movement speed. This has led many players to crown it as perhaps the best submachine gun in the game. To great disappointment within the community, Bungie thought it would make sense to invalidate essentially over half of the game when releasing the newest expansion. And so it happened. With Beyond Light, the majority of our weapons all got sunset. Many PvP players to this day still miss the original version of the Antiope D. Fortunately, however, Season of the Splicer brought us back a new and improved version of the Antiope in the form of the Shayera's Wrath SMG from Trials. It has some elite perks, best-in-class stats, and access to adept mods which push out its effective range up to about 29 meters. Honestly, it's almost more like an auto rifle than an SMG, and if you happen to get a roll like this one with kill clip, you're going to be melting Guardians from quite a long distance. With the pellet shotgun nerfs in Season of the Lost, slug shotguns have risen in the meta, with Chaperone being one of the most popular options. But its story in Destiny 2 actually started all the way back in Forsaken. Unfortunately for our protagonist, not many of the players were willing to sacrifice the ease of use coming from a pellet shotgun in return for only a few meters of extra range. The strength of slug shotguns has actually not changed all too much over the years. It's really just that pellet shotguns got nerfed over and over again, which gave a lot more breathing room for slugs. These changes give you more time to line up your shot while alleviating a little bit of the pressure needed to hit your opponent the second they show up. In the Season of the Lost, slugs became much more popular, and within the archetype, the unquestionable king is the sleek and stylish Chaperone. Not only does it have the best range of all slug shotguns, but when the Roadborne perk is activated, you can shoot even faster and map your opponents from some incredible range. The final installment in our list is the Vex Mythocrutch. Mythoclast. This fusion auto hybrid is a true menace in 6v6 modes and is quite effective in trials as well. The totally fair and balanced 100 aim assist and 100 recoil direction make it really easy to get a decent kill time with the Mythoclast. But this wasn't always the case. When the Vex first made its reappearance in Destiny 2, it was, well, kinda bad. The stability and range felt awful, and the linear fusion mode took forever to charge up a shot, and also the catalyst made basically just no sense. Now though, it got a huge buff in nearly every way, which has led to a massive resurgence in use, to the point where it's about to get a nerf to smack it back down. After you get a kill, you get bonus damage and more stability to extend your streak. If you get 2 kills, you can activate the linear fusion mode to potentially kill 3 more opponents with just 1 shot each. Destiny 2 has some incredible little details and Easter eggs found on many of the weapons and armor throughout the game. Like, did you know that the little fox on the two-tailed fox gets angry whenever you aim at an enemy? This also works with each different version of the ornaments. Better Devil style hand cannons actually have a little indicator on the left side showing how much ammo is left. It will start to blink red whenever you need to think about your next reload. Last City weapons like the Nightshade Pulse Rifle also have this indicator on the left hand side. If you watch the Dead Man's Tail in slow motion, you can actually see it loading 2 bullets at the same time just like it shows on screen. And the bull logo on the left hand side will start to glow as soon as you get your 5th stack of Cranial Spike. That's just another reason to land those headshots. On the left hand side of Heir Apparent, you can see which class most recently won the Guardian Games event. It was originally won by Titans, then by Hunters, and now by Warlocks. This one's just kind of a funny one. The Guardian activates the catalyst on the Cerberus +1 by smacking it really hard on the left side. It might not be the most useful catalyst in the Crucible, but it's definitely a fun one to turn on and off. The sword held by the statue on the Wish Ender actually lights up in blue whenever you do a full draw. You can see this both while you're aiming down sights as well as when you're hip firing. If you have the Heated Exchange ornament for the last word, you can see the gun start to glow as you fire bullets. The more you fire, the brighter it will get. The little circle on the aim down sight reticle on Forensic Nightmare rotates clockwise just like a clock. It starts somewhere around 3 o'clock and then rotates around depending on how much ammo you have. When you get a kill with the Cryocesia sidearm, you can activate the alternate fire mode to freeze your enemies. When you activate this mode, it makes a really cool little animation with the thing spinning on the back of the gun, and you can also hear the loud sound from almost across the map in the Crucible. If you hear this thing ticking away, it's definitely time to get out of there. On any hand cannon in Destiny 2, if you use the controller, you can watch the hammer pull just slightly back. It won't actually fire a bullet until you pull the trigger hard enough to shoot the gun. The iClose SMG has a really cool reticle when you're aiming down sights. If you look at the blue bars on the left and right side, these actually turn red as you fire off bullets. When it turns full red, it's time for a reload. This one's just a cool little animation detail. When you look at duality in hipfire mode, you can see the little spikes on the left and right sides of the gun. When you go to aim down sights though, these spikes actually fold into the gun to hide them. I love these cool little animations that show the attention to detail of the Destiny weapons. The Bad Juju exotic pulse rifle makes some really cool bone-crushing sounds whenever you either swap to the gun or reload it. Many Amalon weapons have a little viewing window on the left side of the gun where you can see how much ammo is remaining. It starts off with a full tank, and then as you run out of bullets, the liquid level will drop. The flavor text on the palindrome hand cannon reads the same way backwards and forwards, just like, well, a palindrome. With the exotic sniper Izanagi's Burden, you can load extra shots into one bullet to make it more powerful. But did you know, when you aim down sights, you can see a sword that shows you how many stacks of honed edge you have, and it'll get brighter depending on how many bullets you loaded in. Whenever you're ready to unleash a heavy attack with the Harsh Shadow exotic sword, the hilt actually lights up with the little flames letting you know that you're ready to swing. One way to know which elemental type you're on with the Dead Messenger exotic grenade launcher is just to look at the UI. However, did you know you can actually figure this out just by looking at the gun directly? The lights on the left hand side will indicate which elemental type you're on. It will glow orange for solar, purple for void, or blue for arc. Did you know that the Drifter is definitely an enemy? Well, maybe you didn't, but if you use a scope that highlights enemies and you point it at him during a pre-game match of Gambit, you can see that he clearly is a threat. I wouldn't trust him. Next up, we have a few really cool reloading animations in Destiny. First up is Cade 6's favorite hand cannon, the Ace of Spades. When you go to reload, it does this really cool twirling animation, and if you get a headshot before you reload, you'll reload even faster thanks to the perk Outlaw. The Chaperone may seem like an ordinary slug shotgun at the surface, but when you finish a reload, it makes this really satisfying whipping sound. And perhaps my favorite of the bunch is the Huckleberry. When you're finished reloading, it does this really awesome spin of the cylinder. It's one of my favorite animations in all of Destiny. I bet this next one is one of the least well-known ones on the entire list. When you go to reload the Dire Promise, if you stop halfway through and look really closely, you can see a skull with a tally marker next to it. I guess this is how the Guardian's tracking how many kills they have. The Jotun exotic fusion rifle has a really cool looking charge up animation with one of the ornaments. But did you know that this toaster can actually toast bread? That's right, Bungie turned this fusion rifle into an actual toaster that you can buy. Did you know the mighty Yallarhorn rocket launcher actually makes a wolf howling sound whenever you shoot rockets? You can only hear it when you have the Pack Hunter buff active, and also if you have a legendary rocket you can hear the same sound. The Staccato 46 Scout Rifle has two really cool ways to show how much ammo is left in the magazine. You might have already noticed the holographic text on the left hand side of the gun showing how much ammo is left, but you can also see the same information when you aim down sights and look at the holographic counter. This one's kind of a cool one. If you take a really high zoom sniper and look deep into the barrel of the Deathbringer rocket launcher, you can see this little red thing. Oh wait, that's a subscribe button, maybe you should click it. Without a doubt, one of the most interesting looking weapons in the entire game, the Graviton Lance, has a really cool sound effect when you fire it. As you go from the top of the magazine down to the bottom, you can actually hear the pitch increasing. One of the throwback weapons from Destiny 1 has a really cool effect when you fire it. On top of the amazing SIVA effects that the Outbreak Perfected makes when you shoot it, you can also see the red lines lighting up. However, did you know if you equip the Matter Scourge ornament, it now has white lines that light up? But that's not even the most important thing. When you aim down sights, it converts it from the normal reticle to this really clean red dot sight. I would say this one's bordering on pay to win. There's a few other notable ornaments that have a similar effect, like the Might of Multi-Tool and the Vigilance Wing. You may have already noticed that the Skyburner's Oath has a red ammo counter on the back to show you how much ammo is left in the magazine. But did you know that the white symbols shown are actually the ammo count shown in the Cabal language? Just don't ask me to translate what any of the other symbols mean. The exotic shotgun Legend of Acreus has electricity showing near the barrel to let you know that you have ammo left in the magazine, but as soon as you fire off your last shot, that electricity goes away. Now up to this point, we've talked mostly about weapons, but there's actually a lot of cool armor effects in Destiny as well. On a hunter, when you wear the exotic gloves Athros' Embrace, you can tell whenever you've activated the perk because little stinger things will pop out of the sides of your gloves. You can see this both in first person and in third person. On a Warlock, there's a really cool strobing effect that happens whenever you equip the Bond of Battle Harmony along with the Mantle of Battle Harmony. You can tell whenever the super is activated on a hunter wearing the Celestial Nighthawk helmet because those eyes will start to glow. We did notice that it activated just before the super was ready when we tested it. On a hunter, if you equip the Lightkin Gauntlets along with the Psionic Stalker Cloak, it creates a cool looking glow on the gloves that you don't normally see. Also on a hunter, whenever you use the Oathkeeper gloves, you can see a cool looking glow on the forearms whenever you fully draw a bow. You can see this in both first and third person. And finally, on a Titan wearing the Peregrine Greaves, you can see little blades showing up on their knees whenever they're airborne and ready to shoulder charge. Let's get back into some more weapons. On the Lorentz driver, you can see how many telemetry patterns you picked up by looking at the tip of the barrel whenever you pull the weapon out. Also, fun fact, if you die to someone while using this weapon in PvP, you will be relentlessly teabagged. On the Malfeasance, if you look really closely, you can see that your hands actually start to shake whenever you fire the weapon. Hawkman starts to gather stacks of paracausal charge whenever you get a kill or a headshot, and it'll make a little caw sound whenever you're ready to fire that final bullet. The gun also lights up in blue to let you know the perk is ready. Many weapons like the Shayera's Wrath have a really cool holographic scope that shows up, but only when you're aiming down sights. As soon as you go back to hipfire mode, you can see it start to disintegrate. On the Osteostriga exotic SMG, if you look closely, you can see the magazine start to disintegrate as you fire bullets. You can also hear an eerie growling sound about halfway through the magazine. When you equip any of the weapons that come from the moon, you can see the little dangly things that hang on the side. Well, if you get close enough to a nightmare, these will actually start to glow red. And in a similar way, whenever you use any of the Iron Banner weapons inside of Iron Banner, you can see them start to glow under certain circumstances. Whenever you activate the alternate fire mode on the Symmetry exotic scout rifle, you can see the barrel start to move forward and open up an area where electricity forms. I really love this animation. When you fire the Sunshot exotic hand cannon, if you slow down the footage and look really closely, you can see that it actually shoots off solar flares when the gun fires. And also, when you fire the gun really fast, you can watch both the barrel and the magazine get really hot. Have you ever noticed the little piece of cheese on the barrel of the Rat King? Also, the gun starts to glow when you activate the Rat Pack by being near other users. Here's another cool armor one for you. With the one-eyed mask on a Titan, you can actually see when the exotic perk is activated because the eye will start to glow. You can see a similar effect on a hunter wearing the Foe Tracer, but only once they deal damage. Did you know the exotic hand cannon Thorn shoots actual thorns as bullets? This one blew me away when I first realized it, and wow, it makes the gun feel so much more powerful. If you're a fan of the Teraba exotic SMG, you probably already know that you can track the progress towards your Ravenous Beast perk by looking at the lights on the left hand side. But did you know you can also track your progress by looking at the 5 little dots that show up when you're aiming down sights? These will start to glow once you either deal or take damage, and once the 5th dot lights up, it is time to shred. With the Lament exotic sword, it sure looks like a chainsaw, and when you start to hold block, you can actually hear the chainsaw motor going. I love these little details that Bungie puts into their game. The Sweet Business exotic auto rifle starts to have its barrel heat up as you fire it, and if you pair it with the Actium War Rig on a Titan, you can fire for quite a long time. By the time you run dry on bullets, this thing's going to be white hot. The exotic sidearm Traveler's Chosen starts to light up whenever you get kills. This corresponds to how many stacks of Gathering Light that you have. But did you know that you can actually see the progress by aiming down sights? Those little triangles on the left and right sides show how many stacks that you have. The exotic sniper rifle Whisper of the Worm also has the perk Whispered Breathing, and when you aim down sights for a while, you can actually hear the gun starting to whisper to you. On the Witherhoard exotic grenade launcher, you can see the lights inside of the barrel start to light up whenever you fire the weapon, and you can also see the blighted ammo disappear when you click the trigger. When you go to reload Xenophage the exotic machine gun, you can actually see Omar the little bug inside. Also, if you equip the Dawning ornament, you can see that Omar gets a cute little hat for the holidays. The last one on our list is probably my favorite out of all of them. The Wave Splitter exotic trace rifle has 3 different power modes, level 1, 2, and 3. You can tell which level you're at just by looking at the back of the oscilloscope. The level of waves you see indicates which level the gun's powered at. This little detail makes the music and science nerd in me so happy. You can see this while you're aiming at sights as well as hip firing. As you watch the gun, you'll see the power levels ramping up and down randomly, but if you happen to walk across an orb, it'll automatically go up to level 3. But the oscilloscope on the back is actually not the only way to tell what level you're at. If you look at the right hand side of the weapon, you can also tell by looking at the 3 power tubes. It was September 6, 2017 and Destiny 2 had just launched. We got new guns, new exotic armor, and new subclasses to experiment with in a familiar Destiny universe. Players were incredibly excited and quickly started crafting their builds and strategies. One of the first standout exotic weapons was the Merciless exotic fusion rifle. In this early era of Destiny 2, special weapons didn't exist as they do today, and Merciless was a fantastic pick in a player's heavy slot. Its exotic perk shortened the charge time of the rifle for every non-lethal hit, making it one of the best DPS weapons of the era. If you didn't want to use your exotic weapon in the heavy slot, Cold Heart was another popular option. This is an arc-based exotic trace rifle initially available from pre-ordering vanilla Destiny 2. Its exotic perk increases the gun's damage output the longer it stays on target. When paired with many other items on this list, it was one of the best DPS setups in vanilla Destiny 2. Eventually, snipers, shotguns, and linear fusions would receive buffs, pretty much knocking Cold Heart out of the meta, but for that first era, Cold Heart was a dominant choice, especially against the raid boss of the Leviathan raid, Khalis. Let's talk SMGs. Risk Runner is a 900 RPM exotic SMG acquired from Hawthorne during the Red War campaign. Players could choose this SMG or 2 other weapons that we'll discuss later. Risk Runner's exotic perk allowed players to overcharge the weapon upon taking arc damage. This would allow players to chain arc damage while shooting the weapon and clear rooms in an instant. The catalyst extended this effect and made it so that getting kills while Arc Conductor was active would return ammo to the magazine. It's still a good pick today, although it has been power crept somewhat by Trinity Ghoul. Continuing the discussion of elemental based exotics, Sunshot is a 150 RPM exotic hand cannon initially acquired from Hawthorne during the Red War campaign. This was the second of the 3 options that players could choose from. The exotic perk made the gun shoot solar splash damage, and enemies who were killed by Sunshot would explode, potentially creating chain kills. This made Sunshot a fantastic weapon to clear out rooms quickly, and it became a fan favorite for both PvE and PvP. Although these days hand cannons are generally outclassed in PvE by other weapon archetypes, one weapon from vanilla Destiny 2 was in a league of its own. Midnight Coup was a hand cannon that dropped from the Leviathan raid and had a static role of Rampage and Outlaw, making it the premier hand cannon of early Destiny 2. This gun was a must-have in PvE, capable of one-tapping most red bar enemies in the game, especially once you got up to the maximum stacks of Rampage. Midnight Coup was without a doubt a fan favorite and used all the way up through the release of Forsaken. Although the gun was sunset and beyond light, this gun still holds a special place in players' hearts. The Sins of the Past, the legendary rocket launcher, combined with Cold Heart, was one of the best DPS options in early Destiny 2. It had cluster bombs, which made rockets do frankly insane amounts of damage. Combined with rally barricades, which automatically reloaded your weapons at the time, players could absolutely melt bosses. Cluster bombs would eventually receive a big nerf, taking Sins of the Past and similar rockets off the table as a top option. However, rocket launchers have since made a comeback recently, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. I'll also give a shout out to Curtain Call, which featured cluster bombs as well and didn't require running the raid to acquire. Legend of Acreus is an exotic shotgun acquired from completing a lengthy quest that began with a Leviathan raid. After defeating Kallus, players would have to complete several challenges, including a difficult version of the Arm Stealer Strike, killing a bunch of Cabal, and farming Emperor Seals, which required players to run the raid multiple times. The reward for completing this quest was one of the best shotguns in the game, capable of absolutely annihilating anything that came across your path. The exotic catalyst also improved the gun, increasing the reserves and the reload speed. Unfortunately, with the release of Beyond Light, the Leviathan and its respective raid layers were sunset from the game. The Legend of Acreus was moved to the Monument of Lost Lights and has remained there ever since. I'll be honest, the release of the first Destiny 2 expansion, Curse of Osiris, did not do too much for the game. The meta stayed mostly the same as vanilla Destiny 2, and random rolls still didn't exist yet, meaning there really wasn't anything to chase. The only notable exception here was Prometheus Lens, which was a trace rifle that grew a giant ball of solar damage the longer you fired it. And for one specific weekend, it made PvP an absolute madhouse. If you want to learn more about the history of PvP weapons, check out my video on the 37 weapons that define the Destiny 2 PvP meta. It's linked in the description. On May 8th, 2018, the second Destiny 2 expansion, Warmind, was released. Alongside it, there were tons of new weapons, a decent endgame experience, and one of the most challenging Day 1 raids we've ever seen. Warmind introduced the Escalation Protocol activity on Mars, and with it, the Ikelos shotgun. This shotgun was the best close-range gun for PvE, bar none in the game, and it would remain there for quite a long period of time. The gun featured the perk Trench Barrel, which drastically improved the damage output. After meleeing a target, you get a massive increase to your damage, reload speed, and handling while the perk was active. You could easily burn through an entire magazine with buff damage, which made the Ikelos shotgun the best burst DPS option in the entire game. I would give it the distinction as the best weapon from this expansion, but there's actually a few guns down the line that edge it out slightly. Unfortunately for the Ikelos, the Trench Barrel perk would eventually be nerfed during Season of the Drifter. The stat buff you gained would cut off after firing 3 shots. In this one patch, the gun went from being almost a required part of your average loadout to sitting in players' vaults and never really returned to its former glory. On July 17th, 2018, a patch was added to the game. It was discovered that by completing a specific public event on Io and killing a mini-boss that spawned off to the side, a portal would be opened. Interacting with this portal would then begin a secret mission, the Whisper. Successfully completing a run of this mini dungeon in under 20 minutes would reward players with the exotic heavy sniper rifle, Whisper of the Worm. This was a sniper paying tribute to the Black Hammer and the Black Spindle from Destiny 1. This exotic instantly became one of the highest damaging weapons in all of Destiny and was effectively mandatory for any player hoping to beat the raids. Its exotic perk White Nail would refill the magazine after landing 3 rapid precision hits. If that sounds broken, well, it's probably because it was. This gun was basically an automatic pick in the heavy slot for most players during pretty much the entirety of the gun's early existence. Whisper would eventually be nerfed in Season of Opulence. The perk White Nail was changed to still refill the gun's magazine, but now it would pull ammo from reserves instead of creating bullets out of thin air. After its nerf, Whisper was still a good option, but just never as powerful as when it was first introduced. The next gun on our list is kind of a special case. Wardcliff Coil is a rocket launcher that was released with Destiny 2 Vanilla, but received some special attention during the Prestige Leviathan's World First Raid race. The gun itself is an interesting exotic. It fires a volley of rockets that does extra damage to vehicles. However, during the Prestige Leviathan race, a glitch allowed players to effectively have infinite heavy ammo with the Wardcliff Coil. This was quickly dubbed the Coil Glitch, and the exotic rose to infamy after Clan Redeem used the glitch to secure the world's first race. There's plenty of opinions out there about this particular event, but regardless of what you think, the Wardcliff Coil and coil glitching became a definite part of Destiny history. Keep an eye on this next one. Sleeper Simulant is an exotic linear fusion rifle that was initially released in Destiny 1 and later re-released in Destiny 2 with the launch of Warmind. The exotic perk Dornrushkin allows players to over-penetrate enemies and bounce the lasers off of walls. It was definitely a lot of fun to use when it first launched, but it really started to shine more in Season 15 when players had access to the mod Particle Deconstruction. Regardless of how powerful it was in the particular meta, it was always funny when a laser bounced back and accidentally kills you or your teammates. We finally got to the last elemental pick from Hawthorne from Vanilla Destiny 2. Alongside Sunshot and Risk Runner, Graviton Lance was a void option that players could acquire from Hawthorne during the Red War campaign. When compared with two other picks, the Graviton Lance was, well, underpowered to say the least. However, with the launch of Warmind, it received a huge buff that changed how the gun worked. When you killed a target with a Graviton Lance, the gun would spawn void particles from the body that would explode and chain to other targets. Suddenly, this pulse rifle could clear out entire rooms of ads instantly. Forsaken launched on September 4th, 2018, and it changed the landscape of Destiny 2 forever. Random rolls on weapons returned, special weapons were back, and we had one of the best eras of the game that we would ever experience. With the launch of Forsaken, we received two brand new areas, the Tangled Shore and the Dreaming City, and 10 days after the DLC launch, the Last Wish raid opened. This was the hardest day 1 raid ever, and only 12 players cleared the raid within the first 24-hour period. Sorry, Dado. With Riven defeated and our heart cleansed, players gained access to one of the most insane weapons of the era, the 1000 Voices exotic fusion rifle. This gun fired a giant continuous beam of death that would explode after a slight delay. It was a ton of fun to use in both PvP and PvE and became one of the most highly sought after weapons of the era. Unfortunately, it's become a victim of power creep in modern times. It enjoyed a brief resurgence during the Season of the Lost with particle deconstruction, but otherwise it hasn't really been seen in the limelight as much as it used to be. It's still a fun pick and a decent damage dealer if you have it though. During this era, a lesser used exotic shotgun, the Tractor Cannon, received an important change. The Warmind expansion buffed Tractor Cannon to debuff enemies to receive 50% more damage from void sources for 10 seconds, but in Forsaken, this debuff was changed to instead deal 33% more damage from any source. This was a major bump to team damage since many of the top DPS options were non-void sources. Tractor Cannon was used extensively to buff team DPS in many in-game encounters, plus it's just really fun to boop enemies around. Thunderlord is an exotic heavy machine gun that initially launched way back in Vanilla Destiny 1. It made its return to Destiny 2 during Forsaken in the Festival of the Lost questline, The Lost Cryptarch. Its exotic perk, Rain Havoc, summons lightning whenever you land a final blow on any target, and it now also stuns Overlord champions. In the modern era, Thunderlord is a very good pick for ad clear, especially with the addition of the Arc 3.0 subclasses. However, it used to also be quite a bit more powerful. When it first launched in Destiny 2, it was more than a little broken. Focusing damage on a singular target would absolutely melt health bars. I mean, take a look at some of these clips. Thunderlord eventually got hit with a series of nerfs, reducing the machine gun's usage, but not without good reason. During the Forsaken era, we also received an early version of the seasonal model that we now know today. The first of these content drops was known as Black Armory or Season of the Forge. With it, we were introduced to the vendor 801, a new suite of weapons, and a new raid, Scourge of the Past. One of the most popular weapons of this era was the Hammerhead Legendary Machine Gun. This machine gun had an incredibly clean design, and it boasted some absolutely nutty perk combinations for both PvE and PvP. This included Feeding Frenzy and Rampage. It was the machine gun of the era. Unfortunately, it's since been sunset, but it still holds a special place in many players' hearts. Speaking of the Black Armory weapons, let's discuss the exotic that was the forefront of the season, Izanagi's Burden. This exotic sniper has a unique perk that allows players to combine the 4-round magazine into a single high damage bullet. When combined with a tech known as reload cancelling, players could burn through the magazine and the reserves in no time, making this one of the best exotic DPS options, especially down the road a little bit later. To receive the gun, players would have to complete a multi-week quest involving the seasonal activity The Forges. It was absolutely worth it though, and for a long time Izanagi was a required part of many raid loadouts. Back in Season 3, Bungie introduced us to a new concept, Pinnacle Weapons. These were static weapons that came as the rewards for intense lengthy quests. Pinnacle weapons were the precursors to the ritual weapons, but significantly stronger. They each had a unique perk that could not be found on any other weapon in the game, effectively making them legendary weapons with exotic perks. The first few of them were mostly geared to PvP players, including the Redrick's Claymore, Luna's Howl, and Not Forgotten. In Season 5 with the Black Armory, pinnacle weapons were expanded to include one for each of the 3 core playlists, Strikes, Gambit, and Crucible. Each of the options added this season were fairly attractive weapons, but one in particular really stood out. The Crucible pinnacle weapon that season was the Mountaintop Grenade Launcher. It was a weapon that would strike fear in the hearts of both Guardians and PvE mobs. The quest to get the Mountaintop was brutal. It required a lengthy grind in the competitive playlist and nearly 1,000 grenade launcher kills. However, players who completed the quest would receive a weapon well worth the grind. The Mountaintop's custom perk was called Micro Missile. It meant that the grenade would fire in a perfectly straight line. Combined with the auto-loading meta at the time, Mountaintop was easy to use and can pump out some absolutely crazy damage. It would eventually receive a nerf just before Beyond Light, reducing the damage and the blast radius of the grenade launcher. And when combined with sunsetting and the removal of auto-loading Wells of Radiance and Rally Barricades, it's since really become unused in PvE. But for a significant period of time, it was by far the best grenade launcher in the game. Speaking of grenade launchers, let's talk Anarchy. This is an exotic heavy grenade launcher that was released with the Scourge of the Past raid and was a random drop from the end of the raid. This grenade launcher was interesting because it didn't really function like any other ones in the game. The exotic perk would allow grenades to be stuck to enemies for a set amount of time and then chain arc damage to other grenades fired from the launcher. You could also set up fun little traps for enemies on the ground. It would deal impressive damage over time, allowing the user to swap over to another weapon and then continue doing additional damage. This exotic became a crucial part of the hot swapping meta, and we'll touch on that a little bit more later. On March 5th, 2019, Season of the Drifter began, kicking off the only real blemish of Year 2. I'm sure some people out there like Gambit Prime, but this season was a little bit lackluster compared to the likes of Black Armory and the later Season of Opulence. Thankfully, there was a bright spot in what otherwise would have been a huge bust. 0 Hour was a secret mission that was released on May 8th, 2019. It was comparable to the first secret mission, The Whisper. If players managed to complete 0 Hour in under 20 minutes, they would gain access to the exotic pulse rifle Outbreak Perfected. This pulse rifle is a redux of Outbreak Prime, its Destiny 1 counterpart. Its exotic perk, the Corruption Spreads, infects the target with Siva nanites, increasing the pulse rifle's damage against the target. It also stacks with other players using the gun, meaning you could reach some absolutely nutty stacks of nanites against bosses. It was a popular pick against the raid boss Galron a season later, and it's hard not to like that Siva aesthetic. Here's crossing our fingers that we'll get that 0 Hour mission back once again from the content vault. When you think of SMGs in Destiny 2 history, one option really stands out. The Recluse Legendary SMG was a pinnacle weapon from the Season of the Drifter. This SMG is insane in every way possible. It had a unique perk called Master of Arms, which increased the damage of Recluse after getting a kill with any weapon. This allowed body shots to deal the same amount of damage as headshots and melt any enemies in sight. Recluse was without a doubt the best SMG in the game, bar none. It was even one of the main reasons that the concept of sunsetting was later introduced into the game. In the modern era, it has a spiritual successor in the SMG funnel web, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Following Season of the Drifter, we received what was possibly the best seasonal drop that we've ever had, Season of Opulence. Alongside it, we got a new raid, new weapons, new armor, and the most popular seasonal activity by a landslide, the Menagerie. During the season, one archetype became the true DPS meta, heavy grenade launchers with spike grenades. In particular, the Swarm of the Raven grenade launcher became extremely popular, and it was one of the most sought after drops from Iron Banner. Alongside this, the meta in Season of Opulence remained mostly stable. Mountaintop and Recluse were so good that there was effectively no reason to use anything else, and then you toss on Swarm of the Raven and you'd have a set loadout. However, some changes coming soon would shake things up in a big way. On October 1st, 2019, Destiny 2's expansion Shadowkeep was released, and alongside it, Bungie made some huge changes to how Warlock's Well of Radiance and Titan's Rally Barricade worked. Previously, these abilities would instantly reload weapons while they were active, allowing players to unleash death on bosses without really worrying about reloading. With the release of Shadowkeep though, Bungie changed abilities that automatically reloaded weapons to simply boost that reload speed. While this was a much needed change for the health of the game, it significantly shook up the meta. In the power vacuum, an unlikely contender shot up to the front of the pack, the Izanagi's Burden. Although Bungie had now removed autoloading abilities from the game, an option was still available, the perk Autoloading Holster, which could roll on certain legendary rockets and grenade launchers. One of the premier choices became the Wendigo GL3, which was the Vanguard pinnacle weapon from Season of Opulence. While it didn't have spike grenades, its pinnacle perk was Explosive Light. Picking up orbs of light would increase the damage on every grenade, making for some absolutely insane damage rotations. Unfortunately, Shadowkeep didn't really introduce that many new interesting weapons. The Izanagi's Burden and autoloading grenade launcher meta remained for much of the year. However, one new weapon would become embedded in the meta for many years to come. Divinity is the raid exotic introduced with the Garden of Salvation raid. It's an exotic trace rifle that debuffs and disrupts a target and creates a large bubble around the target that acts as a massive crit spot. It's since become a requirement for most raid groups, making it nearly impossible to miss a critical hit on a boss. In recent times, the debuff provided by Divinity has been nerfed from 30% to 15%, which is still a nice damage debuff. It's definitely still a top choice for endgame PvE, and it will likely remain so for the foreseeable future. While Shadowkeep itself didn't introduce anything too out of the ordinary, the final season of Year 3, Season of Arrivals, certainly did. To start, we got the spiritual successor to the D1 fan favorite Dark Drinker in the form of a new sword, the Fallen Guillotine. This sword's heavy attack would cause the player to enter the spin to win mode and repeatedly hit any target unfortunate enough to be in that radius. It also had the ability to roll the perk Whirlwind Blade, which massively boosted the damage that it dealt. On release, a god roll Fallen Guillotine did absolutely insane amounts of damage. This was the top sword in the game and was only replaced pretty recently. It was also a legendary weapon, which meant it could be paired with the next entry on our list. It's pretty common for Destiny 2 Season Pass weapons to not be the best in slot picks. There are some interesting niche choices out there from time to time, but on the whole, they're kind of outclassed by exotics that players actually have to earn. However, there's one exotic that definitely goes against this trend. Witherhoard is a single-shot kinetic grenade launcher and has remained a top choice since its release in the Season Pass during Season of Arrivals. The grenade launcher fires a Taken Blight, which on collision with a target would slowly damage the target until the effect ran out or the target was dead. It can also be fired onto the ground directly to deal some impressive AoE damage to multiple targets. It's still definitely in use today. Seasonal mods like Breach and Clear and Weaken Clear allowed Witherhoard to continuously debuff a target, making it one of the best choices for endgame content these days. Towards the end of Year 3, the Izanagi autoloading grenade launcher meta was hit with a pretty substantial nerf. This loadout relied heavily on being able to reload cancel Izanagi's burden when creating that high damage bullet. Bungie changed how reload cancelling worked, and it no longer applied to that special animation, which absolutely gutted the damage that players could deal with Izanagi's burden. This one nerf completely shifted the meta for the foreseeable future. Players quickly realized that hot swapping between two autoloading slug shotguns though could crank out some pretty impressive damage numbers. And to add to the fun, another old exotic made a reappearance, Anarchy. See, I told you that one would come back. One of the best options for hot swapping was the first in last out slug shotgun. While this shotgun was initially released during vanilla Destiny 2, it was re-released during Season of Arrivals with a brand new perk pool including autoloading holster and vorpal weapon. First in last out could also be paired with the next entry on our list and would create what would become a staple of the damage metas for the next few seasons, the hot swapping meta. Obviously, you need a slug shotgun in both the kinetic and energy slots in order to hot swap between them. However, until Shadowkeep, legendary kinetic slug shotguns just simply didn't exist. Blasphemer was the first of its kind. It's not all that special to write home about, it has a pretty average perk pool for PvE. However, its existence led to the creation of the hot swapping meta, and that's why we included it in the video. It was almost immediately power crept though by another option, one with a much better perk pool, a cooler looking design, and that's the next weapon on our list. On November 10th, 2020, Beyond Light was released. This expansion introduced us to the frozen wastelands of Europa, the shiny interiors of Bray Exoscience, and the haunting silence of the Deep Stone Crypt. As far as the meta went, hot swapping between two special weapons was gaining popularity. As fate would have it, one of the weapons that could drop from the Deep Stone Crypt raid was the kinetic slug shotgun, Heritage. It had a unique perk exclusive to the raid weapons called Reconstruction. This automatically reloads the weapon up to double the actual magazine size from reserves. This meant you could have a shotgun with a dozen slugs in one magazine that would continue reloading while you were using it or while it was stowed. Upon release, Heritage instantly replaced Blasphemer as the go-to shotgun to chase. Thus, the hot swapping meta truly began. Heritage, First and Last Out, and Anarchy would become the new damage meta, and it would remain that way for quite some time. With Beyond Light's release, pinnacle weapons became a thing of the past. They were replaced with the less powerful but easier to acquire ritual weapons. These wouldn't have any special perks, but they would feature some interesting perk combinations that weren't really available on other weapons. The ritual weapon from Season 13 was a legendary special grenade launcher known as Salvager's Salvo. This grenade launcher was notable for its PvE perk combo of Ambitious Assassin and Chain Reaction. This perk combo was absolutely insane for clearing large groups of enemies, and it was made even better in Season 14 with the introduction of the mod Breach and Clear. In Season 14, Vault of Glass, the original Destiny 1 raid, made its return into Destiny 2, revamping the encounters, weapons, armor, and exclusive exotic. Vex Mythoclast, an absolute beast of a fusion rifle in Destiny 1, was changed a little bit for Destiny 2. In Destiny 1, Vex was the only fusion rifle in the game in the primary slot and had the perk Timeless Mythoclast, which allowed it to be fired like an auto rifle on trigger pull. This meant it had no charge up time like a typical fusion rifle. In Destiny 2, the weapon functioned in a pretty similar fashion, but it became a solar weapon and it also had the ability to transform into a mini linear fusion rifle as an alternate fire mode. While this gun wasn't amazing when it first came to Destiny 2, it was soon heavily buffed and became a fantastic option in both PvE and PvP. It really began to shine during Season of the Lost when the mod Particle Deconstruction was introduced. It could absolutely slaughter minor targets, and it wasn't a bad pick as a secondary DPS option if you really needed one. It hasn't seen quite as much use in recent seasons, but it's still a really fun option if you have it. Speaking of particle deconstruction, it's high time that we talk about linears. Linear fusion rifles, or LFRs, have been near the top of the damage meta for quite some time now. Players began to realize how good linear fusion rifles were during Season of the Lost when particle deconstruction was one of the seasonal mods. This mod provided additional damage for a short time after you hit a target with either a fusion rifle or a linear fusion rifle. One of the first LFRs to gain wide recognition was the Stasis LFR from Trials of Osiris, Reed's Regret. It could roll with the perk Triple Tap and Firing Line, and it was a great damage choice. Unfortunately, due to the fact that it was locked behind Trials of Osiris, a lot of PvE players wrote this one off. Some older weapons made a reappearance during this time as well. 1000 Voices was brought back from the dead due to its ability to apply the maximum stacks of particle deconstruction with just one trigger pull. Sleeper Simulant became once again a pretty good choice in the meta, and I'll also give a shout out to the Threaded Needle, which could roll with auto-loading holster and Vorpal weapon. While linears were a fantastic DPS option, particle deconstruction also affected regular fusion rifles. Cartesian Coordinate was a fusion rifle that relaunched with the Season of the Chosen, and it had some insane rolls for everyday gameplay. While regular fusion rifles have somewhat fallen out of the meta, Cartesian Coordinate is still one of the better options for players who want to use fusion rifles in PvE. On December 7th, 2021, Bungie released the 30th Anniversary DLC. This was a mini expansion that added weapons, armor, and more goodies to celebrate their history as a developer. Some of these treats included weapons based on previous games like Halo and previous weapons from Destiny's past. The most important of these weapons was of course the Galahorn exotic rocket launcher. This was reintroduced mostly the same as its original D1 counterpart. Its exotic perk Wolfpack rounds fires additional seeking rockets alongside the main payload. However, it also had an additional perk exclusive to Destiny 2, Pack Hunter. This new perk grants Wolfpack rounds to every other legendary rocket launcher in the player's fire team. Thanks to this perk, rockets became much stronger contenders in the PvE meta. Options like Hothead and Bump in the Night when paired with Galahorn made for some pretty crazy damage numbers. This re-release of the Galahorn single-handedly brought rockets back into the rotation for DPS options, and they've remained a pretty good alternative to linear fusion rifles ever since. One of the most interesting additions from the 30th Anniversary Pack were two swords that could drop from the Dares of Eternity, which was a core playlist from the expansion. Half Truce and the other half are Arc and Void based swords respectively, and their design is based on the Energy Sword from the Halo franchise. However, these two swords introduced a perk that no other weapon in the game had, Eager Edge. This gives the player a brief window in which the sword's lunge distance is greatly increased after pulling it off their back. By timing this perk, players can leap forward and travel much quicker than they would normally be able to. On top of this, the player base discovered some additional tech that could be performed with an Eager Edge sword. Shatter Skating and Well Skating is a tech that involves pressing a few separate inputs while having an Eager Edge sword equipped. When done correctly, a player will be launched ridiculously fast and can travel large distances almost instantaneously. These swords revolutionize both travel and speedrunning and are incredibly fun to play around with. I highly recommend picking one up if you haven't tried it yet. On February 22nd, 2022, a nearly 6-month delay after its initial launch date, Destiny 2 The Witch Queen was released. Alongside it, we got a new campaign, destinations, new weapons, new armor, new exotics, and a new raid, but we also got something new. The Witch Queen also launched with a legendary option of the campaign, which cranked up the difficulty and provided challenge for those who were tough enough to take it on. The Witch Queen campaign garnered almost universal praise from the Destiny community, and it really felt like Destiny's storytelling was finally back to where we really wanted it to be. 11 days after the expansion launch, the gates opened up for the Vow of the Disciple raid. Although the Day 1 raid race was plagued with server issues, the raid itself was visually stunning. The encounters were fairly complex and they required a working knowledge of a bank of symbols. The loot from this raid was likewise amazing. One example is Cataclysmic, which is a solar linear fusion rifle that has access to a unique perk combination. Cataclysmic can roll with 4 times the charm and bait and switch, which is a perk that's only found on weapons from the Vow of the Disciple raid. If you hit a target with all 3 of your weapons, whichever one has bait and switch will gain a 35% increase for a short period of time. Because of this perk combo, Cataclysmic can pump out a ton of damage and still have plenty of ammo in the reserves. This makes it easily one of the best linear fusion rifles in the game. But that wasn't the only great weapon from this raid. Of course, something would be amiss if we didn't talk about Forbearance. It's an arc-based special grenade launcher that's notable for a few reasons. To begin, Forbearance is a wave-frame grenade launcher which is pretty special all by itself. Prior to Lightfall, there's only been 4 of these in the entire game, and one of them was Sunset. On top of that, it's the only arc-based wave frame in the game, making it stand out even more. Regarding the perks, Forbearance has access to one of the best perk combinations for grenade launchers, Ambitious Assassin and Chain Reaction. Remember how I said that Salvage Salvo got power crept by another better option? Well, that would be Forbearance. It also has one last thing going for it, its Origin trait. These are like a static perk that all weapons from a particular source are guaranteed to have. In this case, Forbearance has access to the Valve Disciple Origin trait Soul Drinker. When you reload your weapon, you regain health based on how many enemies did you kill with that magazine. This is really good for Forbearance because it's a single shot grenade launcher. You are constantly reloading, which means you're constantly getting your health back. Overall, this grenade launcher is just absolutely nuts. It's fantastic for clearing out rooms of enemies, although it doesn't work particularly well for boss damage. It's absolutely worth picking one up though if you have a chance. With the release of Beyond Light, the Recluse Pinnacle SMG was sunset, leaving it to collect cobwebs in most players' vaults. However, in the Witch Queen, we got an alternative. Funnel Web was effectively the spiritual successor of the Recluse. It uses the same model and has the same feel as the Recluse, although it doesn't have access to the perk Master of Arms. It also has access to the Origin trait Vice Stinger, which has a chance to automatically reload your magazine when you hit a target. It was also a naturally great pick with the volatile rounds meta of the Witch Queen. Overall, Funnel Web is just an excellent pick as a Void SMG, and it might only be outclassed by some of the other recent options. Continuing with the meta of linear fusion rifles, the Taipon FR4 is a Void-based linear, and it's an excellent choice for Void builds. While it's not quite as strong as Cataclysmic, the Taipon has the unique trait of being craftable without needing any red border drops. After completing a short quest that introduces players to the weapon crafting system, players are given the completed crafting pattern for Taipon, and this allows literally any player to craft a perfect linear fusion rifle without any grinding. Taipon has access to perk combinations like Triple Tap and Firing Line, which is incredibly good for activities that need fire teams. However, it also has access to Frenzy in that second column, which is a decent choice for solo players. This makes for a great alternative to players who don't want to grind out for that Cataclysmic role, but still want to deal some decent damage. It's absolutely worth crafting, especially in the current meta of linear fusion rifles. I mentioned that a few SMGs out there could compete with the Funnel Web, and we've reached our first option. The Callus Mini Tool is a solar SMG that initially launched back in the Season of Opulence, but was relaunched during Season of the Haunted. If you want a solar SMG, this is the gun for you. The Mini Tool can roll with the perk Incandescent, which applies Scorch to enemies in the surrounding areas when you get a kill. In the right loadout, this is easily one of the best options for Solar 3.0 builds regardless of the class. In that same vein, we're bringing back another old pick. The Icarus SMG is a gun that's been released 3 different times over the course of Destiny 2's history. It initially launched as a Void SMG back in the Warmind expansion. It was re-released during Season of Arrivals as an ARC SMG, and it was widely regarded as one of the best SMGs of the era, especially due to its ability to generate Warmind cells. And now it's been re-released again during Season of the Seraph with a refreshed perk pool and the ability to be crafted, and once again it's one of the premier primary weapons in the game. This time it has access to the perk Volt Shot, allowing players to chain lightning between targets for a short period after reloading the weapon after a kill. Like the Callus Mini Tool, this is another weapon that you should absolutely be chasing if you don't have one yet. It works wonders, especially with the ARC 3.0 subclass system. Retrofit Escapade is a heavy machine gun launch with the Season of the Seraph. The vast majority of the time, machine guns are not really used for boss damage. The archetype is really better suited for ad clear and mechanics, but not really for pure DPS. However, there was a brief period of time where Retrofit Escapade was competing with linear fusion rifles for DPS. This machine gun has access to a perk called Target Lock, which heavily buffs up the weapon damage the longer the weapon's firing at a target. When you combine this with volatile rounds, Retrofit is doing absurd amounts of damage for a machine gun, and players out there were wondering if this might make up the new meta. Well, unfortunately, this wasn't intentional. Bungie eventually changed how fast those volatile rounds could proc, which gutted the damage that Retrofit could do. It's still a good machine gun, but melting bosses is no longer on the menu. When you say you're a hunter main in Destiny, other players start to judge you. It's not your fault though, it's just that some hunters have these massive toxic egos, and well, others just like to use their easy instant win buttons. This stigma against hunters goes back to the very beginning of Destiny in September of 2014. In some ways, things are better now than they were back then, but when there's no content to play, everyone starts pointing their fingers at the hunter mains in our community like clockwork. I dove deep into the dark negativity pools of the internet trying to understand the hate directed towards hunters. I'm talking hundreds of Reddit threads, Bungie forum posts, and Twitter comments. Some of the things I saw left me feeling kinda gross, but I've narrowed down almost 8 years of hunter hate into 17 critical moments. Let's go back in time to September of 2014 when the lives of Destiny players were forever changed. The date is September 9th, 2014. Many soon-to-be Guardians are about to fire up Destiny for the very first time, a brand new sci-fi shooter from the makers of Halo. After waiting in long lines at GameStop for the midnight release, it's time to put the disc into our consoles for the first time. The opening music hits us and we make our first Guardian. For many players, that first character was a hunter, and like most things in life, many people start to love to hate what's popular. From the very beginning, Hunters were hated for nothing more than just being the class that everyone wanted to play because it looked so cool. You would think that that pettiness would go away pretty quickly, right? Well, wrong. Hunters were hated throughout most of Destiny 1. They had the most players representing the class, and they sounded so much louder than everyone else just by sheer volume. Titan and Warlock mains quickly started to notice a pattern, or maybe they just wanted to believe that a pattern existed and never really stopped seeing it. There were a lot of nerfs in early Destiny 1. The community stigma back then was that many of the nerfs happening were a direct result of Bungie catering to the Hunter mains. Their complaints were all over the Bungie forums, on Twitter, and over the Destiny subreddits. When Titans had Twilight Garrison that let them in-air dodge twice, the Hunters made Bungie nerf it. Sunslinger Warlocks had a Firebolt grenade with stupid amounts of tracking. We're talking about hitting people way around corners and walls. It also had the potential for a damage over time effect like Thorn, and it dealt so much damage that a Guardian hit by a Firebolt would have almost no health left. Without a doubt, this was overpowered and it did need to be nerfed, but when it happened, thousands of Warlocks around the world blamed the loss of their favorite PvP grenades on those Hunter crybabies. The third moment on our list took place in year 1 of Destiny 1 when the second ever raid was released, Crota's End. Back in Destiny 1, we were all pretty bad at raids by today's standards, like really bad. Seriously, most players who actively raided back then were far worse than what people think of for the worst LFG raiders these days, and no raid showcased just how bad we were like Crota's End. The first encounter was pretty tough for many players, so Hunter mains figured out an easy way to cheese it rather than doing it legit. You can go invisible to avoid being seen by enemies, or you can just skip major sections of the encounter. In the second encounter, a staggering amount of people never learned what you're actually supposed to do. All anyone knew to do was to use an exploit to get yourself outside of the map, put on the Icebreaker sniper rifle, and avoid any coordinated effort whatsoever. But the final encounter in Crota's End was where Hunters were loved and hated at the same time. Only Hunters could reliably be the sword bearer during the final boss fight against the nephew of Savathun, Crota. You see, the only way to deal damage to Crota was with a special sword. But first, the rest of your team needed to do enough burst damage that he would kneel down. Once Crota would kneel, you could damage him with the sword. But Crota was kind of a crazy boss to fight. If he hit you, you would die instantly. He was massive, so his lunge was equally as large, and connection issues caused him to be a little bit erratic at times. Anyone who got close to him had to be ready to instantly deal damage with the sword, or else they'd get smashed across the floor like a bug on a windshield. This raid was seriously no joke back in 2014. Most of us were underleveled at the time and had very few raid clears, and as someone who ran a lot of Crota's End back in Destiny 1, being the sword bearer was considered a pretty big responsibility for your group. It was stressful, but also so rewarding when you got the kill. The entire team's success or failure was on your shoulders, and the tiniest little misstep would mean a likely wipe for everyone. I remember spending hours and hours for every single Crota kill that my friends and I earned during those early days. But Hunters made playing the role of the sword bearer a million times easier with a little bit of cheese that only they could do. Hunters were the only class that could crouch and become invisible. This set them up as the perfect sword bearers because Crota would never attack them since he couldn't see them. Having a skilled hunter in the group meant you could avoid spending an entire night of trying to finish that final boss, and defeating Crota gave some of the best weapons at the time. There was a legendary rocket launcher that rivaled the Gallarhorn in damage called the Hunger of Crota, the Word of Crota was a great hand cannon, the Black Hammer was a top tier DPS sniper. Really, so many amazing weapons only dropped from Crota, and it wasn't guaranteed that any weapon would even drop. In fact, it was actually kind of rare for weapons to drop, so you really needed a reliable sword bearer. Some of the Warlocks and Titans at the time became a little jealous that Hunters were always deemed as the sword bearer, but if we're honest, they probably enjoyed the loot that they got as well. Now we're moving forward in time from the end of 2014 to mid-2015. The House of Wolves expansion was released, and the most popular Crucible mode in Destiny's entire existence was born, Trials of Osiris. Hunters were the most played class, and one subclass in particular was the most popular. Blade Dancer was like an ARC version of the Spectral Blade super that we have now. If you've ever thought to yourself that Spectral Blades was a little bit overpowered, well, the early Blade Dancer was way more powerful. With Blade Dancer, Hunters had access to Blink, the same movement ability that's now only available on the Void Warlock. In this era of Destiny, Blink was even more easy mode than Stompies are today, which is kinda hard to think about if you never played D1. You'd instantly dash forward like the current Blink, but there is basically no delay to pull your weapon out. So you can blink right over someone, turn around, and shotgun them before they could even move their controller to face you. You have to remember, there was no mouse and keyboard back then. Destiny was only on consoles and everyone was using controllers, and controllers couldn't even turn as fast back then as they do now, so players' thumbs just couldn't turn the character around fast enough to counter the Blink shotgun playstyle. There was also hardly any cooldown for Blink, so you could do it a second time to really break someone's sticks. Think back to when Top Tree Dawnblade in Destiny 2 could Icarus dash twice in a row back to back pretty much anytime they wanted. The Blink jump on Blade Dancer was maybe even stronger than this, and that wasn't even the only overpowered thing on the Blade Dancer. There was also the Super, which is probably about as strong as Spectral Blades was at its peak in Destiny 2. It was really hard to outrun a Blade Dancer because they could combine Blink with the swipe from their super for some insane movement. The only reliable counter back then was a Fist of Havoc or a Nova Bomb, or one of the other one and done shutdown supers. Blade Dancer's super had an option where you could use your heavy attack to send an arc wave along the floor called Razor's Edge. This was a one-shot kill that could travel underneath a Ward of Dawn bubble and hit anyone inside. It would take 2 attacks to kill someone in a bubble, but it was just as powerful as it sounds. If this sounds awful, we're still not even close to done. Arc Bolt grenades were just ridiculous in early D1. The Arc Bolts were much better at chaining than they are in D2. It also did so much damage that you could kill an enemy player in Trials just by hitting them with an Arc Bolt and then hitting them with one shot of Thorn. Or you could also just throw an Arc Bolt together with a teammate and wipe an entire team. And of course you could combine this with a lucky Raspberry exotic chest piece, so you'd have an Arc Bolt every single time you spawned. You could literally die in Trials, get revived, and then throw a grenade right away that did over 120 damage to everyone. And we're still not even close to done yet. Blade Dancers had a perk called Fleet-Footed, which is basically like getting the Stompy Slide for free built right into the subclass. Backstab was a perk that would deal bonus damage for getting a melee hit from behind to one-hit kill, but the funky hitboxes and netcode would make this often proc on just a regular melee to the front if you jumped a little bit while delivering the blow. The Encore perk made the super last forever, just like the Gwiz Vest on the Spectral Blades, and Hungering Blade gave your health back for landing a charged melee kill or just kill with your super, just like Devour does now. Perhaps the most powerful part of this entire subclass though was that you always got access to Quick Draw on all of your weapons intrinsically just from the subclass options. This perk was so powerful in Destiny 2 that Bungie took it away from shotguns like the Fellwinters and then also still nerfed it. Imagine having Quick Draw on every single weapon for free. It's no surprise why Hunters were hated early on by every Titan and Warlock. Thousands of players moved over to the Blade Dancer because if you can't beat him, you might as well join him. On the weekends, Trials often looked like a tournament of Blade Dancers just trying to fight to be the top Blade Dancer of them all. Moving on to number 5 on our list, we're now in the second year of Destiny 1. This was the launch of the Taken King expansion at the end of 2015. Night Stalker was one of the brand new classes that launched with the expansion, and boy did it give Blade Dancers a run for their money. The Night Stalker looked similar to the Night Stalker we have today in Destiny 2. They had a smoke grenade in D1 that would slow and disorient enemies as it does now, and it led to one of the most annoying playstyles to face in PvP. If you were trapped in the smoke bomb, you were in trouble, but as long as you didn't take any extra damage, you'd be okay and you could get out of there. But Night Stalkers figured out a way to make these smoke bombs way more deadly. As soon as that smoke bomb left their hand, the void grenade would be only pixels behind it. Because you were trapped in the smoke for so long, these follow-up grenades would kill you before you could even escape. This smoke bomb plus void grenade duo became known as the Wombo combo, and players definitely still use it today. But just like the Blade Dancers, Night Stalkers also came with their own movement ability that was considered just as overpowered. Shade Step was very similar to the Gambler's Dodge that every hunter has access to today, but back then it was exclusive only to the Night Stalker subclass, and at the Taken King launch you could do 2 of them very quickly with almost no cooldown. Just like in early D2, Shade Step was able to break any and all tracking and aim assist. We've already talked about how broken the tracking grenades like the Firebolts and Arc Bolts were, but Night Stalkers were able to completely negate those just by using their dodge. To make things worse, most Night Stalkers used the exotic helmet Graviton Forfeit, which at the time gave Shade Step for free. In Destiny 1, we had more control over our subclasses, kind of like the new Void 3.0 model. You were able to select any nodes that you wanted in the skill tree. This meant you could get all the massive benefits from Shade Step, but without much of a cost. When you were running the Graviton helmet, you could also use the Night Stalker perk called Keen Scout since Shade Step was given to you already. And Keen Scout would mark your enemies through walls with a little red X just like the modern Foe Tracer helmet. Night Stalkers became very hated for how powerful they were in the Crucible. You couldn't counter the Wombo combo with a Titan Barricade like today or an Icarus Dash like you can in Destiny 2. You'd just get slowed down and hit by the nade and eventually die. Oh, and by the way, Tether was actually a pretty decent super back then too. Now we're moving into the second era of our list. Destiny 2 launched through the end of Forsaken. In the first year of Destiny 2, Hunters received a lot of hate for the same reasons as Destiny 1. They were again the most popular class, and therefore their voice was the loudest and perceived like they were complaining the most, which meant they were calling for a lot of nerfs to Titans and Warlocks. But things really heated up when the Go Fast update made Arcstriders one of the strongest subclasses in the Crucible, and Hunters were definitely hated for this one. Overnight, the Arcstrider super regeneration was reduced by 25%. Supers were now available much faster than they were before. The movement speed while in your super was also dialed up so you could catch people much easier. Before, the Arcstrider was so slow that they could basically never catch up to someone that was running away from them, but the Go Fast update really helped this slow melee super quite a bit. The Arcstrider's dodge animation was also made faster, and attack animations happened quicker, and the AoE range of the light and heavy attacks was also increased. Basically, the Arcstriders became fast and agile, which made them much harder to kill during the double primary meta. You gotta remember, this was before special ammo existed in Destiny 2, and primary weapons had a slower time to kill, so if you saw an Arcstrider twirling at you, well, you were basically already dead. But to make things worse, there was one exotic that was so broken it single-handedly made hunters the most hated PvP subclass by miles. Added in Season 3, the Worm Husk Crown initially gave an immediate health and super regeneration every time a hunter would dodge. Realistically, this meant the hunter could use their dodge in almost every engagement to break aim assist, break tracking, and instantly start healing when they took damage. Season 3 competitive PvP was completely full of hunters wearing this helmet who would play the bottom tree Arc Strider build to get that insanely useful dodge back as fast as possible, and with this they could also take advantage of damage resist while they were performing the dodge. This build dominated the competitive meta so hard that Bungie eventually changed how the helmet worked to give it a small health bump instead of instant regeneration, but wow, did it draw some hate when it was first introduced. As the Warmind era came to a close, Bungie made a subtle change in patch 1.2.3 that would mostly go unnoticed by the player base for a while. But as the players slowly started figuring out how to take advantage of this change, this small tweak became perhaps one of the most complained about aspects of hunters in the history of Destiny. The infamous Hunter Boots Stompies weren't really used all that widely in early Destiny. They buffed your sprint speed and slide distance, but their signature bouncy nature only benefited the high jump option on Hunter. Patch 1.2.3 though improved the other two jumps, most notably the strafe jump, which had become the go-to option for shotgun apes on a hunter. This change allowed players to bounce their heads on low ceilings to generate a tremendous amount of speed around PvP maps. Burnout, for example, is basically a Stompy hunter's favorite playground since you can use the movement to rotate around the map super fast. Over time, we really started to see a rise in hatred towards hunters just because of their movement. This was mostly thanks to Stompies, difficulty tracking the hunter jump and dodge on console, and the dodge breaking aim assist. In retrospect, it's kind of funny to think back to how the movement exotics have risen in popularity only after a while in both Destiny 1 and Destiny 2. The Bones of Ao provided an extra jump to hunters in Destiny 1, and over time those became a go-to option for many great players. And in Destiny 2, the Zombies launched without a whole lot of notice, but eventually became so heavily complained about that they finally are getting a nerf in Season 17. It's now September of 2018 and we're heading into the Forsaken era of Destiny 2, and this means we need to talk about the Spectral Blades Night Stalker. Spectral Blades had almost as much damage resistance as the Arc Staff, but it also had its own reason for being hated. When you landed a precision kill while crouched on Spectral Blades, you would immediately go invisible and have wall hacks. This meant you could see where everyone was on the map while also disappearing yourself from the radar. During this meta, the Not Forgotten and Luna's Howl were two of the best options for PvP, and Night Stalkers would pair these two hand cannons with a chaperone for some precision kills. These headshot kills would then also proc your wall hacks, and now you can line up the next kill as someone runs around a corner. The same thing worked great for sniper rifles, and it turned hunters into the best sniping class until the eventual buffs to the Top Tree Dawnblade. For those that didn't play Destiny back in Forsaken, this might sound crazy overpowered, and that's because it was crazy and overpowered. Pretty much every great hunter player was getting some huge kill streaks by abusing wall hacks. The Night Stalker neutral game was just incredible, but so was the super. Like I mentioned before, Spectral Blades got a ton of damage resistance naturally, but it could get even more damage resist while you were invisible. The super lasted for a very long time, and you could extend the super even more with an exotic chest piece called the Gwizzin Vest. With this vest on, you got a huge return of super energy anytime you use the heavy attack to go invisible again after you got a kill. This made your super last so long that you could run from one edge of the map to the other and kill the same person over and over again. This thing was truly busted, and when it launched, it could be abused to keep your super going for minutes on end as long as you had one kill and kept refreshing the super. Of course, Spectral Blades was not the only overpowered hunter subclass at the beginning of Forsaken. The new Solar Hunter super Blade Barrage was insane in both PvE and PvP. It's been nerfed so many times though you can barely even recognize it from what it looked like back in Forsaken. With the exotic gloves Shards of Galanor, you would get refunded an insane amount of super energy every time you landed some hits, and this was so much energy that you were throwing supers basically all the time in every activity. In the Crucible, you were constantly getting Blade Barrage because hunters would get a majority of their super back every time they casted it just by wearing these gloves. And the tracking on Blade Barrage back then was insane. The only time you didn't get a kill was if you pop your super at some weird angle and the super put you behind cover. This thing practically gave you free kills just for pointing your camera anywhere near the enemy. It basically countered every other super in the game outside of maybe the Ursa Furiosa Titan, which was equally as busted. As we're moving further down the Forsaken era's timeline, there were two weapon loadouts that were used religiously. Both of them were used by a majority of the player base, but because everyone always saw hunters using them in PvP, they were the ones who really got blamed for these crutches. The first loadout was a Spare Rations hand cannon from the Reckoning and the Mindbender's Ambition shotgun from the Hollow Alert Nightfall. Spare Rations was the best in slot legendary hand cannon at the time. It had a great recoil pattern for both PC and console players, but was favored a little bit more on PC. With some of the amazing perk options, incredible range, and some really high aim assist, it became a go-to meta hand cannon for many PvP players. Likewise, the Mindbender's Ambition was the best in slot energy shotgun at the time. It had awesome perks, it featured the best shotgun archetype, and it had the best one-shot kill range. These two weapons paired together with the infamous Stompy Boots to make hunters wearing all black in the Crucible public enemy number 1. This meta loadout dominated PvP for quite a long time, and although both of them are sunset now, it's a combo that probably won't be forgotten by many veteran players. The second weapon loadout that was extremely popular back in Forsaken was the Mountaintop Grenade Launcher paired with the Recluse SMG. This combo was particularly effective on Hunter because with Mountaintop you could jump high up in the air and shoot a mini rocket at the ground to deal some splash damage. It was a lot easier to land these hits with the Mountaintop if you were way above them. If you managed to hit them directly, you'd get an insta-kill, and if you barely even touched them, the Mountaintop would still deal a ton of splash damage. So much damage that you could quickly swap to the Recluse for some simple cleanup kills. Those Mountaintop kills or the cleanups with the Recluse would then proc the Master of Arms perk on Recluse, which would buff your damage. The kill time with the Recluse and this perk together was basically Call of Duty levels of fast. Regardless of what kind of loadout they're using, many players still see hunters as the sweaty tryhards of the community that crouch on whatever the best weapons are currently. Realistically, there's probably just as many sweaty players that play on Titan or Warlock, but the community hate has been mostly directed at the hunter class. With the launch of Shadowkeep, a new system to customize our characters was added. The seasonal artifact was born, and it had some incredibly powerful mods. There was one mod in particular that was so strong it became universally hated by the other classes. Arc Battery gave you an overshield while using your class ability, and it reduced your cooldown on activation. By using class ability cooldown mods, hunters could dodge roughly every 10 seconds. Arc Battery's overshield stacked with a Wormhusk crown, which at this point gave a small health bump and shield bump that we have now. All of this also stacked with the damage resistance that you would get from dodging on the bottom tree Arc Strider. So every 10 seconds or so, hunters basically turned on God mode and became invincible. Imagine if every engagement you had against a hunter, they were using the most powerful neutral game ability in Destiny. There were zero trade-offs and it was very easy for anyone to get the shortest possible dodge cooldown. Hunters were definitely hated for crutching with the Wormhusk crown, Arc Battery, and bottom tree Arc Strider. And I can't really blame anyone for using this because it definitely became the most used build of that season. Later on in Shadowkeep, Bungie released a brand new event that would see which class truly was the best. Guardian Games had hunters competing against Titans and Warlocks to see who could earn the most medals. Whichever class collected the most was crowned the victor. Every day you could watch the standings of each class in the competition. Players around the world were ready to root for and compete for their favorite class to win. But when the torch starting the very first Guardian Games was lit, Bungie crushed every hunter main's hopes of victory. You see, Bungie knew that if the competition was 1 hunter medal equals 1 Titan or Warlock medal, hunters would just automatically win because they have the most members. So with the hopes of making the Guardian Games actually competitive, Bungie weighted each class's medals a little bit differently. With this one decision, the win was completely taken out of the hunter sales. They won the competition on the first day, but proceeded to lose every single day afterwards. Many hunters complained that Titans were cheating or that Bungie rigged things to make sure that it was impossible for hunters to win. During an event that was supposed to be fun and create some healthy competition between the classes, well, community bickering instead soured the fun that Bungie had planned. They later came out and explained the reason that Titans had won, which included why hunters had no chance at winning. Bungie said that every Titan that played was contributing more medals than each hunter was. So even on the first day when hunters won, Titans still outperformed them. Hunters really only won because they had the most players show up. A year later, in the summer of 2021, hunters were able to redeem themselves though and win the second Guardian Games. Nothing too serious happened until November of 2022 when Beyond Light launched the 3 most broken subclasses in Destiny 2's history. The Shadebinder Warlock was the most complained about initially for being too powerful. The Behemoth Titan was not viewed as a serious contender at first, but later became known as one of the most powerful subclasses in Destiny PvP. The Revenant Hunter at launch was actually thought to be in a pretty good spot. The super felt somewhat balanced as it really was the first reliable shutdown super for Hunter since the original Blade Barrage. Players were really only dying if they got frozen by Silence first and then cleaned up with Squall. The Shuriken melee was strong, but not considered to be anywhere near as overpowered as the Shadebinder's ranged melee. Overall, players actually seemed to be enjoying the Revenant. Someone even made a Reddit post saying that Revenant was the most balanced stasis subclass. They really had no idea what was coming, did they? Initially, very few players realized how powerful the Shadow Dive ability could be when combined with the Glacier Grenades and Whisper of Fissures. It wasn't until Drewski posted a Revenant guide video showing off how insane the Shadow Dive was that this new playstyle really started to get noticed. Overnight, everyone was leaping around and WWE smashing their stasis crystals. I don't think I need to convince anyone about why hunters were hated during this period. For months and months, pretty much every hunter was a Shadow Dive main until it finally got nerfed. Not only could the Shadow Dive dunk easily kill groups of regular players in PvP, but it could also instantly delete pretty much any super in the game. Trials of Osiris essentially devolved into a battle of who could smash the crystal first. This combo was finally nerfed, only for another aspect to come along and buff the total damage by adding an extra crystal that could be smashed. Out of all the periods on this list, I think Shadow Dive era may have been the most painful. Now we're in the final months leading up to the Witch Queen expansion. A massive amount of ability changes have just been announced, both reducing their lethality and also slowing down the cooldowns. With one patch, the Crucible was instantly going to be far less ability spam focused. Or so we thought. The unforeseen consequence of these changes was that everything that buffs a neutral game without directly dealing damage became more potent. So things like Stompies, Dune Marchers, and Transversive Steps are still top exotics, but there is also some new exotics coming up in the meta to take advantage of these changes. With Void 3.0 launching alongside the Witch Queen expansion, Hunter mains found a newly rekindled love for the invisibility playstyle. They now have even more ways to become invisible, which makes exotics like the Graviton Forfeit more desirable. This paired perfectly with some of the more annoying weapons to die to in the Crucible. Of course, fusion rifles are a natural pairing with invisibility. You go invisible, then sneak close to your enemy and start pre-charging your fusion, then peek out as soon as you're ready to let the shots fire, and you effectively have a free kill. Invis also pairs painfully well with bows like Le Monarque. Aside from the high burst damage output, it also deals an AoE damage from a perfect draw and has infinite ammo. Invisible players are always tough to play against, and with so many hunters abusing this playstyle, it's become yet another reason that many Destiny players hate hunters. But being invisible isn't nearly as annoying as being borderline unkillable. With the launch of the Witch Queen, one of the new hunter exotics was really slept on at first. This didn't last long though, because just a few weeks later, hunters were throwing dustfield grenades around every corner. When you put on the Renewal Grasp exotic gloves, your dustfield grenades have a larger effect radius. Allies inside of your dustfield also take less damage. It's up there with the Stag exotic helmet on a Warlock. If all of that wasn't enough, enemies inside of your dustfield grenade also deal less damage, and this could be paired with extra damage resist from the Whisper of Chains fragment on Stasis. Ability cooldowns in PvP were nerfed, but there were still plenty of ways to build for frequent grenade throws, and many hunters would set up their builds so that their dustfield grenade was almost always available. Luckily, this one's getting a justified nerf as well, just in time to figure out the next reason that the Destiny community hates hunters. But hey, I'm still going to be a hunter main for life. Identifying as a Titan main is a dangerous thing to do in Destiny. They've always been at the center of a lot of hate, but some recent Destiny seasons have twisted that dial up to 11. In this video, we're looking at the last 8 years of Destiny history and remembering 19 moments in time that represent the pinnacle of Titan hate. This story begins in 2014 because even before the launch of Destiny 1, the seeds of Titan hate were planted and beginning to grow. The Destiny 1 beta gave everyone an early taste of PvP. This was the start of Titan hate specifically for the Striker Titan's Fist of Havoc super. Destiny back then looked nothing like it does today. Movement and reaction times were slower, field of view was more narrow, and frames per second were lower. Basically, everyone was just really bad at playing Destiny back then, and kills weren't as easy to get as they are today. Kills felt exciting and well earned. Most engagements came down to gunplay skill differences instead of the dozens of abilities that we see everywhere in the modern Crucible. And this led to the first seed of Titan hate. As soon as you get a Titan low in PvP, they'd slam you with their Fist of Havoc super to instantly kill you. This was incredibly frustrating because they were nearly invincible while activating their super. Fist of Havoc was an insta-kill slam with an enormous AoE range. It had wild damage resistance and almost no cast time. It felt like getting blasted by a Nova Bomb from just inches away, except the Titan took no damage while they were casting it. But our next ability made Striker Titans even more hated. Most of you are familiar with the various flavors of Shoulder Charge available in Destiny 2. We have an Arc one, a Solar one, and a Void one that each do slightly different things. If you've been around for a while, you probably remember when these would one-shot kill you. But can you imagine if those abilities had no cooldown? In Destiny 1, Shoulder Charge was automatically available just after sprinting for a few seconds, and even if you hit an enemy, it wouldn't consume your melee ability for a cooldown. This was a completely separate ability, and it would one-shot kill in PvP. Many early Guardians had the times of their lives just shoulder charging everyone in sight instead of using a gun. This worked in Iron Banner, in Control, in Clash, and even in Trials. This made the Bungie forums and the Destiny subreddit foam at the mouth. Every Hunter and Warlock was screaming about how unfair the shoulder charge was in PvP. It was the only one-shot ability in the game, and it required no aiming or skill to perform. And you could do it as often as you'd like. They even added an exotic to let you shoulder charge take down supers, which became quite the fun minigame for the Destiny Titan mains out there. In modern Destiny 2, there are many ways to suppress a super and take them right out of that multi-kill streak they were about to enjoy. But back in vanilla Destiny 1, there was only one way to suppress a super, the bouncing suppressor grenade. And unlike modern Destiny, Titans were the only class with access to this fun denial grenade. Blade Dancers in particular enjoyed some lengthy kill rampages, which attracted many of the sweatier players to try out the Hunter class. but a single grenade was able to rain on their parade and pop them right out of their precious super. This made Void Titans who had mastered this grenade incredibly frustrating to play against in PvP. Titans were always supposed to be the tanky class in the Destiny universe. They were kind of like the tank in the typical MMO class trilogy, but certain Titan mains decided that they didn't want to embrace that slow moving playstyle, so they invented their own way to play. Titan skating was movement tech invented to rapidly accelerate in a straight line. Players would quickly start and then stop their booster by spamming the jump button with a specific rhythm. This allowed Titans to pick up some impressive speed along straightaways and became a popular way to play Titan as the game's PvP scene developed. In particular, a player by the name of AE Gabriel became perhaps the best known for early mastery of the Speed Demon movement technique. It could be difficult to control for novice players, but once mastered, it opened up a completely new way to approach movement in Destiny, and it paired especially well with the hand cannon and shotgun weapon setup. But skating quickly in a straight line simply wasn't enough for Titans. They needed some extra agility, and an infamous exotic armor piece provided just that. Twilight Garrison allowed Titans to dodge mid-air and completely change their trajectory. This was the perfect pairing with the speed offered by Titan skating. Now Titans could zip down a straightaway and then change directions on a dime. It provided a ton of maneuverability in the middle of a gunfight, and it even helped in PvE content to stay alive in some of those tricky platforming scenarios. The hunters out there hated that Titans had basically stolen their unique Shade Step move, which was exclusive to the hunter class, and made it arguably even better by allowing Titans to perform their dodge while in the air. And Warlocks were just annoyed because they became the only class in the game without the ability to quickly change directions. The Taken King brought with it many changes to Destiny. We had a new destination, a new story, new raid, new weapons, and notably 3 new subclasses. Hunters got the Void Night Stalker, Warlocks got the Ticklefingers Arc Stormcaller, and Titans got the Solar Sunbreaker. But one of these 3 had a special trick up its sleeve. Sunbreakers got so much damage resistance during their super that normal sniper rifle headshots that would take down any other roaming super in PvP were ineffective against this mighty new subclass. In fact, the only way to take it down was with an extremely high impact sniper like the Black Spindle, or a high impact sniper paired with a lucky extra damage bullet. This subclass was just insanely strong in PvP. It got health back on every kill, it created a huge AoE explosion with its hammers, and it lasted seemingly forever. PvP was pretty fun back in the Taken King expansion, but the Sunbreaker Titan definitely made the Destiny community hate Titans. But Sunbreaker wasn't the only powerful Titan option for PvP. The Void subclass was called Defender, and its entire kit was built around that identity. One of its most powerful abilities was called Disintegrate. Basically, powered melee kills would create a force barrier overshield around you. For Destiny 2 players, it's similar to the extra shields that Void Titans get whenever they pop their barricade. Back in Destiny 1 though, this overshield was arguably more powerful than it is today. There were basically no other overshields in PvP, so having one could be a huge advantage. But things really heated up for Titans when the No Backup Plans exotic was released. This exotic pair of gloves did pretty much the exact same thing as it does in Destiny 2. It gave you an overshield for getting kills with your shotgun in exchange for your melee charge. This was deadly when combined with the universal remote exotic shotgun. This was a shotgun with a ton of range that fit into the primary slot. In other words, this lets you run both a shotgun and a sniper during a time in Destiny's history where this was otherwise impossible. Plus, universal remote only required primary ammo. Special ammo was fairly easy to come by back then, which made this odd pairing actually perfect. Your sniper dominated the medium to longer ranges, and the universal remote dominated the shorter ranges, and when combined with Titan skating, you could speed up to your targets near instantly. Shotgun kills were easy to land, and the overshield made staying alive feel like a cakewalk. And with having effectively 2 special weapons, you were a lethal force on the battlefield. Moving over to Destiny 2, all shotguns, snipers, and fusion rifles got moved into the heavy ammo slot to make way for the double primary system. Instead of the fast-paced PvP that Destiny 1 players had enjoyed, everyone in Destiny 2 played by holding hands while watching lanes with their longer range weapons. It almost looks like we've come full circle 5 years later. The current PvP meta seems to consist of everyone using long-range weapons from long distances once again, but now we're just standing behind Titan barricades and buffed by Warlock rifts. The pace of combat has also gone back to a crawl. What's really interesting though is how Titans have been at the forefront of the larger Crucible meta this entire time. But first, we need to go back to vanilla Destiny 2 to show you what changes led to where we are today. In early Destiny 2, PC players who played Titan figured out a new way to move incredibly fast. By mapping the jump thrusters to your mouse wheel, you could spam the jump input fast enough to pick up some insane speed. And to make it even easier, you could apply this fast input by using a macro instead of doing it manually. And with this, Titan skating was reborn. With this method, Titans could skate around faster than just about anything else in the game. You could even move so quickly that you'd kill yourself if you ran into anything. For a while, this actually wasn't so bad. It added some spice back to the game that was really slow at launch. This was just after the Go Fast update near the end of year 1, and everyone had remembered how unfun Destiny 2 had become before this amazing patch. The incredibly slow and boring gameplay of vanilla Destiny 2 had nearly killed the franchise. But like most things in Destiny, players found new ways to exploit this new movement in PvP. Titans were able to abuse the shotgun-only playstyle that so many players hated to play against. In the Crucible, Titans would fly forward at Mach speeds to get in close range with their melees and their shotguns to melt opponents before they had any idea what happened to them. And this Titan skating playstyle worked perfectly with the exotic armor Syntheseps. When you were surrounded by 3 or more enemies, Synthos would dramatically boost your melee and your super damage. At one point, the damage buff you got from Synthos also stacked with the buff you got from Well of Radiance. The game thought that you sitting in a well was the same thing as you using your own super. But the real problem was how Synthos worked in PvP. Remember, this is back in early Destiny 2 where it normally required 3 melee hits to take down a Guardian. With the Synthos, you only needed 1 punch, plus they buffed your melee lunge distance by an incredible amount. So Titans would skate from their spawn all the way into the enemy lines as fast as possible, then get surrounded by 3 foes and then start killing them 1 punch at a time. Plus, if they used the Void Sentinel class, they would get an overshield in the process and become nearly unkillable. Later on in Destiny 2 during the Forsaken era, many Titans used their Ballistic Slam melee on the new Middle Tree Striker to wipe an entire team with a Death from Above melee. They would leap up into the air and then slam into the middle of an enemy team and get 3 or more one-hit kills immediately as a reward. This was definitely the most Titan exotic in Destiny. Speaking of the new Striker subclass, many Titans opted to use the Fist of Havoc super instead of the Thunder Crash. Way back before Arc 3.0, the best Arc Titan option by far was the Bottom Tree. It had Knockout, which was just as powerful as it is today. But that wasn't the real problem. Kills during your Fist of Havoc super extended the duration by a ton. It became commonplace to die to the same Striker Titan 2 or even 3 times during a single activation. A Titan in their super could run from one end of the map to the other, killing everyone in between multiple times. They also recovered their health rapidly from every single super kill. But the carnage of the Striker Titans didn't stop there. The exotic armored Dune Marchers provided a passive boost to sprint speed and a little bit of electricity every time you landed a punch after sprinting. Or actually a lot of electricity depending on how lucky you were. At its worst, you would get zapped by the lightning chain multiple times. But even more frustrating, you would often get double zapped because the Titan punched your nearby ally. This was annoying enough to play against, but the lightning would also travel around corners and through walls. You could even get hit by the lightning generated from a dead teammate if you got too close. If Striker Titans with infinite roaming supers zapping everyone to death wasn't enough, Sentinel Titans were also causing havoc with their busted super as well. Forsaken launched with an exotic called Ursa Furiosa and the Banner Shield super. Back then, Ursa was insanely broken. Any damage that you dealt to a Titan who was holding up their Banner Shield would get refunded back to the Titan as super energy. It was so extreme that you would often see a Titan pop their shield, soak up some damage, and then immediately have it refunded into a full extra super whenever it ended. You couldn't even counter a Sentinel in their super with another super. If it did massive damage like a Blade Barrage, the Titan would block all of that damage and then just have their super refunded. If it was a roaming super, the Titans could block that too. A super trying to melee the shield would just get knocked right backwards, sort of like you got parried. It was an invincible wall that you couldn't break through no matter what. Your best bet was just to run away and wait for it to end. While all of this was going on, Titan players also discovered perhaps the most busted exotic in the history of Destiny. The One-Eyed Mask launched with Forsaken, giving you wall hacks anytime your enemy damaged you, and then whenever you killed the target you were tracking, you would get a huge overshield, instant health regeneration, and a damage boost. It had absolutely no downsides for all of these benefits. Once someone was inflicted with any damage, you would know their exact movement patterns and you had all of the tools you needed to defeat them. This exotic plagued the competitive playlist for months. You had to be extremely careful with how you engaged against it because a single Titan who knew how to utilize this busted helmet could easily wipe your entire team. We're moving forward in time and guess what? The one-shot Titan melee is back again. This time because of a seasonal artifact mod called Thunder Coil. This mod buffed your outgoing arc melee damage with no other requirement and paired perfectly with the knockout, frontal assault, and reversal perks of the Bottom Tree Arc Striker. Unlike the one-hit kill punch accessible by using Syntheseps though, Thunder Coil could be used with any exotic. This meant you could run Dune Marchers or One-Eyed Mask and still have the ability to one-hit kill enemies with a single melee. Can you imagine if this mod was permanent? I think I would just retire from PvP for good. Antaeus boards were basically the Uno reverse card of the Titan arsenal. In their current state, they give you a large frontal shield whenever you slide after sprinting for a while. This shield protects you from incoming damage and reflects those enemy shots right back at them. Even today, it's quite a strong exotic as the shield can reflect absolutely anything back at your opponent that they might throw at you. But what if I told you that not long ago, you could get that shield on every single slide? You could be literally immune for the majority of the game just by sliding around. And that's not all. Not only did Antaeus boards give you virtual immunity, they also gave you super energy anytime someone shot at you. I want to know who thought this was a good idea. These things were absolutely nuts, and they very well deserve the nerf that they received. At the start of Beyond Light, all 3 stasis subclasses were incredibly strong in PvP. We can argue about which one was actually the best, but without a doubt, Behemoth was very strong. With the Cryoclasm aspect, Behemoth Titan could slide an incredible distance and their super lasted forever. But a few months later, they became even more annoying. Behemoth Titans could become incredibly tanky. Just by breaking a few stasis crystals and picking up their shards, you could get an overshield thanks to the Whisper of Rhyme Fragment. This would stack with Whisper of Chains to make Titans nearly unkillable. It was so much damage resistance that even a sniper rifle headshot couldn't take down a fully buffed up Behemoth Titan. Season of the Haunted brought with it a Titan exotic so powerful that it even challenged the One-Eyed Mask. Remember that one? For just shooting you, your opponent would give you wall hacks, a damage boost, and crazy healing with an overshield after a kill. Loreley did kind of the same thing. For just shooting you, your opponent would now give you a free sunspot. If you've recently gotten into Destiny 2, you might not remember how they worked before Solar 3.0. Today, if you check out the description for sunspots, you'll see that you get extra ability regen and restoration from sunspots. The healing is the new part. Back in the day, it was actually a damage boost, and Loreley was the first time this changed. It added healing on top of that damage boost, and to make things even worse, it gave you a sunspot for free whenever you reach critical damage. Do you see the connection here? For One-Eyed Mask and Loreley, your opponent was punished just for playing a first-person shooter game with you. Those were some painful times in the Crucible. Arc 3.0 made Titans god-tier powerful in both PvE and PvP. All of a sudden, they got access to the best arc grenade in the game. The Touch of Thunder aspect made storm grenades last longer, deal more damage, and track targets. This ability has dominated absolutely everything it comes in contact with. PvE became trivially easy because you could just throw storm grenades every few seconds and blow up anything in your way, and in PvP the storm grenades chased enemies for about half an hour. These abilities could also be cycled incredibly quickly when using the Heart of Inmost Light exotic, which even buffed up their damage. Just like Season of the Haunted, this was another massive blow for PvP players. Season 19 launches and brings with it a new competitive PvP mode, or at least a reissued version of the old competitive system with a new coat of paint. Games in this competitive ladder weren't affected by power level, which meant that any old sunset weapon could still be used effectively. Immediately, players returned to using the old Revoker sniper rifle, which returned ammo to the magazine anytime you missed a shot. What pairs perfectly with a sniper rifle that can't run out of ammo until you stop missing? How about a shield that can block all incoming damage but still lets you shoot right through it? I think it's pretty simple to understand why Sight and Ramparts have risen up in popularity. Bungie has been consistently slowing down the pace of combat for multiple seasons now. It kind of feels like they're trying to compress the skill gap of players. We've seen this with the airborne effectiveness system. There's many ways to heal and mitigate damage, and abilities are more influential than ever with shorter cooldowns. And as a result, combat is almost back to the pace of the double primary meta of vanilla Destiny 2.